The War of the Gods is in the past, and now Lin Feng could be at peace with his wife and daughter. Everything seemed fine until Lin finds out that they are being bullied. He feels useless without being able to do anything since he is in a deep sleep in a wheelchair. The story begins with a little girl swinging the swing. This child is the daughter of our main character Lin Feng. She told her father that her teacher asked him why he didn't go to the meeting. So she warned the teacher that her father was an ancient god of war, but due to his injuries he could no longer move and was paralyzed in a wheelchair. Because of this, his daughter was often bullied. His wife also suffered some teasing and his daughter had to watch her secretly cry at night. The girl really wanted Lin to regain consciousness as soon as possible. Lin saw her daughter's tears as she looked at him hopefully. Suddenly, the girl had to move away from her father when a boy her age appeared next to her and shouted that she was crying again. The girl didn't intend to leave her mess, but the bully looked at her with contempt and said the rumors that the girl's mother took advantage of a crippled man. Such disgusting and untrue words made Ray very angry, so she immediately jumped off the swing and approached Zhou Xiaohu. The girl was furious and yelled at the aggressor that if he dared to insult her parents again, he would receive a punishment because of Ray's reaction. The bully pushed her to the ground. Xiaohu was bigger than the girl, so the push was quite strong. In addition, there was still a swing behind her, and the girl hit her head. The bully rejoiced in the pain of others and even spat on the little girl. Ray felt helpless and held the grass in his hands angrily. While Xiaohu said that she was a small animal, in the end the girl couldn't stand the insults and as she attacked the guy biting her hand. The bully's parents were nearby, and when the boy's mother saw that her son was being attacked, she hurried to intervene. The woman kicked Ray and shouted that the girl was a brute who had no education. Ray found herself on the ground again, but now she looked angrily at the woman who was behaving worse than her son. This woman picked the girl off the ground, ignoring her screams, and carried her towards Xiaohu. After the woman let go of Ray, she started screaming for the girl to kneel down and immediately apologize. Our protagonist was sitting in a wheelchair, and his internal energy began to boil from such injustice to his daughter. Anger and the desire to protect filled the man as he looked at Ray. The daughter didn't understand why she should apologize to the boy who started cursing him. At that moment, Xiaohui's father intervened in this fight. The man grabbed the girl by the ponytail and pulled hard, ordering her to apologize to his son. Ray continued to resist the two adults and received a lap from the woman. Xiaohu's mother looked at the girl as if she was nothing but trash and asked if she was sure of her words. The protagonist's daughter knew well that her opponents were far superior, but she stubbornly refused to bow to them. Suddenly, Xiaohu's father waved his hand at Ray and shouted that he would teach her a good lesson today. But to the great surprise of all parties to the conflict, the protagonist stopped the man's hand. Lin held the man and asked him how he dared to touch his daughter. On that day, our hero finally regained his powers and declared that from now on anyone who touched his daughter would be beheaded. Initially, Xiaohu's father was feeling superior, but now it seemed that his life was hanging by a thread. From that day on, Lin had no intention of allowing anyone to humiliate his family. He pinned the guy to the ground while Xiaohu and the mother watched helplessly. The woman was very worried about her husband and tried to figure out how she could help him. Then she went to Lin and beat him, screaming not to dare to touch her husband. The woman even threatened, saying that she would call the police immediately. Lin did not allow the woman to finish her threat because she was thrown back by the force with which he slapped her. At that moment, she fell on the grass and Lin reminded her that she hit her daughter. The hero was filled with rage and ordered them to remember this day because he spared their lives. Despite the fact that they messed with his daughter, Lin begins to remember his battles. He fought alone against a large number of soldiers. The last warrior was breathing hard and his whole body was covered in abrasions. The protagonist unexpectedly heard someone say that he could single-handedly motivate an army of 10,000 people. Lin quickly turned his gaze to his voice and saw that more warriors were landing in front of him. They say they wouldn't let the protagonist win so easily. One of the soldiers looked at Lin and admitted that he was really worthy of the title, but today he is destined to depart at the hands of the 7 sons of the Western Alliance. Such a confident statement from his opponents made Lin smile slightly, after which he raised his spear and shouted that he had been fighting for 6 years and did not think he should be afraid of them. The leader of the Western Alliance hastened to attack him. The warriors had different types of weapons and jumped, giving him no chance to survive. But Lin dodged the blade. Unfortunately, the handle of the spear hit her body. The protagonist was still able to throw out one of the members of the Western Alliance with the help of his spear. The leader had a weapon in his hands and was behind the prota. He was sure that it would deal him a fatal blow. Lin had to act very quickly to repel someone else's attack. The spear pierced the enemy's body. The leader began to pour red liquid from his mouth. He himself could not believe that such a thing was possible. Lin explained to the enemy that he was very weak, and even with an army of 10,000 people, he would not move him a meter back. At this moment, the 3 remaining members of the alliance were only a meter away. Lin immediately made several cuts and told the warriors to blame themselves for the loss. Lin's spear movements were so fast and confident that the warriors didn't even have time to react. Only at the last moment did they understand that now the end would come for them, and there was nothing they could do with Lin's strong blows. At this moment, the protagonist again stood alone on the battlefield and believed that if it brought order to the country, then everything would be calm at home. After the active part of the fighting ended, the protagonist realized that he was very injured. Lin's eyes were closing, but he knew that he could not leave because his daughter still needed a bone marrow transplant. At that moment, he returned to the present by the voice of Ray, who constantly called to him and clung to his father's legs. The man was very happy to see his daughter. He held Ray in his arms, and the girl could not believe that this was really her father. The protagonist promised to eliminate Xiaohu's entire family if they did not bow 100 times. The family quickly bowed, and with each bow they apologized, saying that they had made a mistake. Ray cried loudly when he said that everyone around him hated his father, but the protagonist promised that he would no longer allow them to harm his family. Ray continued to cry and complain that no one believed her about Lin being a hero. The man heard his daughter but was distracted when he realized that her body had not fully recovered. Lin was upset and knew he needed to wake up to protect the family. The girl immediately noticed that it was difficult for her father and asked him to let her downstairs. Obeyed and carefully placed the girl on the ground. The hero tried to convince her that she was fine. He stroked her head and called her to go home. At that moment, Ray told her that her grandmother kicked them out of the house and forbade them to return home because her mother had to talk to Uncle's son. The protagonist frowned and realized that there was some kind of catch on this. Ray leaned over to his father and whispered to him to pretend to be asleep again. Lin smiled at his daughter and said that she suggested a good idea. Then the man went back to the wheelchair to carry out his plan. Ray immediately started screaming that he went back to being like this because Xiaohu's family assaulted him. Ray turned to the frightened couple and said that he was going after his uncle, and then it would be the end. The girl began to push her father towards the house, and Xiaohu's parents believed that they wanted to demand compensation from them for the damages of the platform. After some time, the protagonist and his daughter finally met in front of the main entrance of the house. There was a blonde woman in the hallway who was very unhappy with her appearance, so she immediately left, insulting Ray. She reminded the little girl that she didn't allow her to bring Lin back until she called them. Ray hid behind the wheelchair and bravely admitted to her grandmother that she and her father were very tired. The woman didn't want to listen to her and angrily ordered her to shut up. Then she pointed to Lin and yelled at Ray not to dare to call this cripple his father. The girl continued to insist that she would call him father. Suddenly, Ray heard a strange male voice that said it would be an honor for him to spend his life with Sin. After that, the tall man left the house. The protagonist became gloomy when his daughter whispered that that man was the one from Uncle's son that her mother had spoken to. The protagonist's wife was called Xin. She was a young and beautiful girl who seemed upset. She said that she wanted to consider her marriage proposal. Sun allowed the girl to think about it a little more, but he was confident that he would make a good impression on her. Sun turned around and saw that a girl and a man were standing in the yard right in front of him. He realized that that girl was Sin's daughter. So Sun went down to the girl and started patting her cheeks, saying how cute the girl was. At that moment, Shin's mother told her to accompany Sun to the door, but the protagonist's wife refused. Ray's grandmother ran after the man to find out how the meeting went, leaving her daughter upset. Ray, after observing the situation, whispered to his father that this man wanted to steal Shin from them. At that moment, the mother came to Ray, so with all care and tenderness she took her little hands. Sin thanked Ray for taking care of her father today. The little girl started to cry and asked her mother if she was really looking for a new father. But Ixin promised that this would not happen. While wiping her daughter's tears, she noticed a mark on her face. Then the woman asked if her daughter had really fought with someone again. The girl didn't want to bother her mother, so she lied, saying that she ended up falling. After that, Sin took the protagonist and his daughter home. After returning to the house, Ray was sent to his room and his parents were left alone. Sin sat on the bed in front of Lin and tried to figure out what was the right thing to do in this situation. The protagonist was wondering if his wife knew that he had woken up. At that moment, his wife says that she knew that he cannot hear her and is not conscious, but she wanted to tell him something. These words of the girl made Lin worry even more. At that moment, he had to make an effort not to give himself up. Sin gently stroked her husband's hair and said with tears in her eyes that Ray was saved when he sacrificed himself, but she wanted her daughter to have a strong and happy family. At this moment, Shin reveals with tears in her eyes that she was ready to marry Sun if he treated their daughter well. It wasn't easy for Shin to make this decision, but now that she told her husband, she felt that she remained honest with the person she loved the most. Then she stood up and sincerely apologized to the protagonist, who continued to sit silently in the chair. Shin started to leave. Meanwhile, Lin thought that his wife had been through a lot during the whole time he was away in deep sleep. Suddenly, a loud knock was heard on the other side. The guy realized that he wasn't alone in the room. And Shin's younger sister came out of the bathroom and said that Lin had no idea that his wife was getting married. The protagonist didn't expect to see his sister-in-law in his room, and although he didn't react to her words externally, he was tense inside. His sister-in-law's name is Jiang. She approached the protagonist's wheelchair and then threw the wet towel. She grabbed Lin by the chin and lamented that such a handsome man could not be used. Soon a melody began to play in the room that distracted Jiang from looking at his brother-in-law. At that moment, the girl lay on the bed and greeted the future brother-in-law. Jiang accepted the call and his feet were in front of Lin's body. Remembering that the sister-in-law was still naked, but the protagonist diverted the girl's attention and began to listen to the conversation. Sun asked Jiang if her sister had accepted the gifts, but the girl replied no. However, she added that her sister sooner or later would be all Sun's. But it seems that Sun didn't believe much in it, so he invited Jiang to buy whatever she wanted. That was all the girl wanted. So she immediately demanded a bag and a pair of shoes. Sun promised to give her everything she wanted if she did something for him. Jiang agreed and went to her sister's closet. She promised that she would do anything Sun said. She dressed in a blouse and asked her future brother-in-law to change Jin's wardrobe when they got married. After that, the girl left the room and Lin was alone, sitting in the center of the room. The protagonist considered what he had heard. It was difficult for him to accept that Sin needed to marry this man to give Ray a future. At that moment, Lin's bedroom window was open, and the light wind blew the curtains. Suddenly, a girl appeared in front of the wheelchair. She bowed to the protagonist and said she was happy that he had finally woken up. Lin recognized the girl as Xiaoqing and asked if she shouldn't be guarding the border. The girl, without raising her eyes, admitted that the master is now more important than the border, especially since after their last battle no one dared to breach the border. Lin listened carefully to her subordinate and asked if there was any more news for him. Qing was sad and said that during these 2 years he was surrounded by ill-intentioned and especially those who want to take away his wife. Qing adds that without an order she could not do anything. So now she asked permission to eliminate all the villains. Lin heard her and could barely contain her anger. He realized that while he was recovering, some people had already managed to get closer. However, he was more worried about Sun now. So the protagonist asked the king to bring all the information about him. The girl accepted the big man's order and said that she would immediately start collecting information and bringing it as soon as possible. The subordinate left the room through the window as fast and unnoticed as she had appeared. Then Lin was left alone again, but he didn't have to be alone for a long time because the door opened. Ray happily entered and told his mother that according to the fairy tale, the prince kissed Sleeping Beauty and she woke up. Ray smiled happily at his mother and promised that if she kissed his father, he would also wake up. Shin didn't know how to answer, but she thought seriously about her words and leaned over to her daughter, saying that this was just a fairy tale. The girl knew that her father had already woken up and wanted to make her mother find out that way. So she insisted that her mother kiss her father. Shin didn't believe it would work, but couldn't refuse her daughter. Then she agreed. Then Shin approached her husband and looked carefully at his face. Lin hadn't seen his wife up close for a long time. Shin put all his love into this kiss because in the depths of his soul there was a hope that the guy would wake up. Ray looked through his hand and thought that now Lin would wake up and her mother would jump with happiness. But it was not as she thought, and the protagonist did not react. Sin looked at his daughter and said that daddy did not wake up and this was just a fairy tale. The girl was very upset, and she did not understand why her father did not get up and show Sin that come to her senses. Sin took her daughter's hand and promised that she would find a new father. But Ray was angry because her mother had promised that no one would take Lin's place, so she screamed that her mother is a liar. Then Ray took her father's hand and tried to lift him. She sobbed desperately and begged him to wake up. Sin couldn't look at it without tears. Ray was sure Lin could hear her and begged him to tell his mother that he had already recovered. It was very difficult for the protagonist to pretend he was still asleep, so he mentally apologized to his daughter because he needed to reveal Sun's true nature, and for that he needed to pretend to be unconscious. At that moment, Ray saw that his father was not reacting at all, so she continued to cry while her mother said that maybe Lin would wake up in the future, but now she really needed a father to take care of her. The girl did not agree with this and continued to reach out to her father. The protagonist continued to remain silent, so Ray yelled that he was a liar like his mother. Shin was forced to take his daughter out of the room and asked her not to yell at her father, but Ray couldn't believe that the father would let his mother replace him. After some time, this difficult day was coming to an end. Everything was dark outside. There was a single light on in only one room of the house. Ray managed to fall asleep. There were tears in her eyes, and in her sleep she mumbled that everyone around her was a liar. Sin was sitting next to her daughter and felt terribly guilty for her. At that moment, the door opens and Jiang appeared at the door. She reminded her older sister about the banquet and asked why she was still home. Sin didn't react. Jiang started to pull her hand and insisted that they had to go. Jiang added that after Izan marries Sun, Ray will be able to have whatever he wants. Shin just wanted her daughter to be happy and not sleep with tears in her eyes, so she felt obliged to go. Meanwhile, Lin was still in the room. King appeared through the open window and there was an envelope in the girl's hand. She calls the protagonist a master and said that the information from this Sun was collected. King added that she had collected all the necessary information. After that, she handed over the envelope and reminded that today was Ginzan's birthday. So Sun is hosting a banquet at the Jangjo Hotel, and the protagonist's wife will be there in about 40 minutes. Lin accepted the information envelope and thanked her subordinate for a job well done. The man opened the envelope and took a stack of papers and began to carefully read its contents. Lin couldn't believe that Sun's family had so many unpleasant methods. Then he started to get up from his wheelchair and ordered Ching to get ready. Lin was going to the birthday party and the girl was going with him. Meanwhile, the young sisters arrived at the hotel in 40 minutes and were greeted politely by a smiling staff member. She asked if the girls came to Mr. Sun's reservation. Jiang confirmed this. The staff member reported that a separate room had been reserved for them. After that, they entered the hall and couldn't believe what they saw. Jiang expressed admiration and asked his older sister to look at the huge arch that wished her a happy birthday, but Xin wasn't so happy. Suddenly, a man adjusted his glasses and said that he was surprised that his father had booked the entire hotel. Jiang quickly found himself next to his future brother-in-law and laughed, saying that he wasn't wrong. At this moment, footsteps were heard in the hotel corridor and the little girl greeted Xin. The child was dressed in a costume and in her hands was a box with a beautiful ring that was meant for the birthday girl. Jiang's eyes lit up when she saw the golden ring with a huge diamond, and she wanted to take a closer look. Sun quickly knelt down and asked Xin to marry him. The hotel staff who watched this scene whispered that Sun's family spared no expense for the engagement. Sun promised the protagonist's wife that he would take care of her and her family. So the man looked at the chosen one and asked if she accepted the proposal. It was very difficult for Xin to make this decision. Her soul was split into two halves and she remained silent. Meanwhile, Qing and the protagonist were sitting near the piano and carefully observed what was going on in the hotel. Qing asked if she should expel that insolent person, but Lin asked her to wait. He looked at his wife and was very worried if she would accept someone else's proposal. At this moment, Xin took his hand away from Sun and said that this was too unexpected for her. The girl reveals that she was worried about who would take care of Lin. Jiang panicked, tried to convince her sister to agree. Sun heard again that the girl needed to think, but this time he had no intention of backing down. The man stood up and began to reproach the girl for her ingratitude. Because he had rented an entire hotel for her and promised to take care of her daughter, Jiang tried to reason with her sister that she should marry him because he was rich and influential, but Xin was very angry because Sun dared to reproach her, so at that moment she refused his offer. After the refusal, the man dared to reach out to her. Xin tried to run away and Sun threatened, saying that if she didn't accept, her family would cease to exist. Sun tried to prove to the girl that she had no choice, but his threats had no effect. So the man whispered that she should be obedient so that her daughter would be taken care of properly. Then he announced that today was her wedding day. The guests began to praise Sun. The protagonist didn't like this attitude towards his wife and told Xing that she would know what to do. In a second, the girl found herself behind Sun. The guy continued to approach Xin, but Xin grabbed his hand, forcing him to look at her. The girl was furious and ordered the guy to stop. The guards immediately rushed towards Sun, but Sun looked confident and calmed the guards down with a gesture and then ordered everyone to leave. The man believed that he was stopped by another beauty because she was simply jealous of his fiancée. Then he stroked King's cheek and asked if she also wanted to be hugged. The guards watched his actions and laughed, calling Sun talented. At that moment, Qin couldn't tolerate such treatment and hit the man's face, breaking his glasses. Sun couldn't believe what had happened. He grabbed his cheek and ordered his guards to finish this girl. The men immediately obeyed and ran to her, screaming that she didn't understand what she had gotten herself into. The guard was very surprised when he saw that, instead of retreating, the girl put her hand in front of his forehead. Then, with a slight king movement, pushed the first attacker away. After that, she also easily neutralized 3 more guards. Without making much effort, the men ended up on the ground. One of the guards looked at the injured colleagues and did not understand how this happened. Sun was furious. He shouted that he was the heir and they were now in his family's territory. King looked at him and said that Sun's insignificant family should behave more modestly. At this moment, Xin says she is very interested in finding out who this girl is. Soon King approached her and gave her a happy birthday. Xin was very surprised. Suddenly, a very beautiful song started playing in the hotel. A man shouted for everyone to look at the stage. The sisters turned their heads and saw a handsome man sitting at the piano playing a wonderful melody. She couldn't take her eyes off the man and shouted that he was very handsome. But Xin recognized her husband. Qing confirmed that he was her master on the stage. Xin didn't understand why this woman called her husband master. Sun was angry when he saw that someone entered the hotel that was booked by his family. Then he called loudly by the manager. The hotel staff heard his shouts and the manager asked him to call the guards. Soon a large number of men appeared in the main lobby of the hotel. The hotel employee apologized and said they would sort things out soon. Sun felt happy due to the large number of security guards. He was also satisfied, believing that the girl who dared to hit him would get what he deserved. Then Sun pointed to Qing and ordered the guards to take the woman away. However, the men did not listen to his instructions but started to drag him out of the hotel. The man shouted as he tried to leave and explained that he was Sun. The hotel employee smiled at the guy and said that there was a mistake because the one who rented the entire hotel was named Lin. At first, Sun started to act smug, but then he realized in a panic that everything had not gone according to plan. The manager approached Ching and apologized for the mistake, then ordered them to listen to the guests and kick the gentleman out of here. Sun was dragged out of the hall along with his guards, ignoring his screams. The manager thought that compared to Lin, this guy was just an entity. He said on the radio that he forbade Sun's entire family from entering his hotel. Sin knew that the attention was once again completely focused on the man who was at the piano. She was very curious to know if her husband was really sitting there. So King told her to go talk to her master. At that moment, Sin's younger sister was delighted with the handsome and rich man that her sister probably knew. Then she asked Sin to introduce this man to her, but Sin said she didn't know him. The rest of the guests were delighted with the unique melody played by Lin. After that, the noise of the explosions caught her attention, and one of the guests asked everyone present to look at the sky. When they raised their heads, they saw that the whole sky was filled with fire, and in the center there was an inscription that congratulated the birthday girl. John was delighted with such a romantic gesture, and Xin had mixed emotions after she heard Lin's name. The girl suddenly felt the need to check if it was really her husband. She turned around sharply and tried to run towards the piano, but the younger sister didn't allow her to run away by grabbing her hand. But the girl didn't stop and ran to Lin. She ran to the piano with full confidence that Lin was waiting for her there. But unfortunately, to her disappointment, there was no one else in the room. She was trying to understand why he left. Her sister appeared behind her saying that Lin was home. Shin heard her sister's words and believed that the protagonist had really gone home, and now she also needed to go back. Lin actually left the hotel and arrived in the room before his wife. Then he asked the king to collect all the affairs of the Jian's family and deliver them to him. The girl apologized for the frankness, but no one needed to know about him, and she could deal with him personally. The protagonist smiled at his subordinate and asked if she was really worried about the consequences of someone finding out about him waking up. King was at the window and preferred not to answer. Suddenly she sees that Shin was entering the house. So she said goodbye to the protagonist and announced that his wife was back. Then she added that she would comply with her master's order. Lin put on her old clothes while planning to hide the news of her awakening for a while longer. Although he didn't want to bother his wife, he was forced to keep the secret. At that moment, Shin passed by his mother, ignoring her questions about how the celebration went of the birthday. The mother shouted behind her that nothing had changed in the room, and the cripple was still there. Jiang followed his sister and told the mother that Xin was very successful today. At that moment, Jiang showed the recording of the protagonist and said that this rich man by the name of Lin rented the entire Jiangzhou hotel to his Xin. Suddenly, the mother tells Xin that now that she has found a richer man, she no longer needs to marry Sun. At that moment, Xin opened the door to his room and called Lin, hoping he would wake up. Tears welled up in her eyes when the girl saw that Lin was still sitting immobilized in the stroller. She was sure she saw her husband in the hotel, but now all her confidence has evaporated. She cried and remembered that 5 years ago her family forced her to marry Sun, but she hated this man with all her might. So she was very happy when her grandfather introduced the protagonist to her to marry. After that, they spent the night together and Ray was born. The girl became a ray of hope in the world of Sin, but unfortunately Ray fell ill and needed a bone marrow transplant. So Lin saved her and complicated her own health. Sin continued to cry when she thought about it. She understood that although her daughter was saved, her husband ended up becoming practically a vegetable. Then his wife knelt in front of him again and begged the man to come back to her, as she could no longer live like this. Lin looked at his wife and her heart was exploding with pain. He mentally promised that she would wait for a short time. Jiang watched this scene and says that he could not understand what his sister saw in this vegetable that depends on everyone. Then she remembered the rich man's sister named Lin, so the younger sister entered the room and asked Sin to go with her to a bar. The protagonist's wife didn't want to go anywhere and said she was going to sleep because she had to take Ray to school tomorrow, so she suggested going another day. But Jiang didn't want to back down and dragged his sister, saying that they needed to relax. Because after what happened, Sun called Jiang and asked her to fulfill her part of the agreement. The girl didn't want to do that at first, but the man promised that he could make that Mr. Lin become her husband. Jiang believed this lie that he would stay with this mysterious rich man and promised to take his sister to the bar this night. Now Jiang was trying to achieve the desired result with the help of his sister. Suddenly Xin agreed and went to fix her makeup. Jiang hugged his sister and shouted that she was the best sister in the world. Xin headed for the exit and Jiang looked at the protagonist with an evil smile. Then she leaned towards Lin and told him that after today his sister would finally get divorced. After that, she also left. Suddenly, the protagonist was alone in the room and Qing appeared through the bedroom window. She reported that she had discovered all the latest cases of the Jian's family. This is the family of Lin's wife. Qing began to tell that there was a financial crisis in her company and Sun's family promised to take them to the top if Sin married her son. At that moment, Lin frowned and said that Sun is very calculating and now they will see if Sun is faster than his blade. After that, the hero saw his wife's car leave the house and ordered Ching to monitor Sun's movements. Meanwhile, at the Love Bar, Sun was sitting and the waiters noticed that the man looked cheerful. They filled his glass with drink and asked if he had any good news. The man laughed uncontrollably and said he had great news, and the people around him congratulated him on it. Soon the Jian sisters entered the bar. Shin asked if they had already come to the right place. The men looked at the girls and noticed how beautiful they were. Sun smiled happily and started walking towards the girls. At that moment, Shin says she wasn't there to see him and demanded an explanation of why he was there. His younger sister tried desperately to calm things down. Then Shin realized that his sister had teamed up with this man to lure her to the bar. Sun tried to convince her to stay, so he bowed to the girl and admitted that he acted rashly, so he apologizes and would like to talk to her about it. The protagonist's wife mentally admitted that her family still needed Sun, so she couldn't destroy this relationship like that. Sun in turn promised that it wouldn't happen again, but the guy mentally says that he was waiting for the moment when he would drag the girl to the bed. So he goes to the counter and takes a glass, then started to pour wine, and took advantage of the fact that Sin's attention was diverted to throw a pill into the glass. Then Sun soon asked the girl to accept a glass of wine as an apology, but Shin replied that he would not accept it because he was driving. However, his sister suggested that the girl drink at least a little to prove that she had forgiven the man. Jiang grabbed the girl and said that nothing would happen. Then Shin accepted the glass. Then she drank it all in one gulp. Jiang smiled and said that now Sun must believe in his sister's sincerity. Sun was very happy and was already anxious to know how he would take possession of the girl. A few moments later, the protagonist's wife felt bad, so she tried to tell her sister that they needed to go back, but the arrogant guy pushed her away and stood next to her. After that, he took the girl in his arms. Sing tried to resist. Although there were many people in the bar, everyone was smiling. In addition, his sister saw what was happening, and even then he didn't try to help her. Suddenly, Ching reported that Shin had been captured, so Lin ordered her subordinate to find out immediately which hotel she was in. A second later, he was told that she was in the Grand Milky Way Hotel. The protagonist was furious and ordered Ching to inspect the situation, but he wanted to deal with the main problem himself. Sun took the girl to a hotel that was not far from the bar. Sin said she didn't understand what was happening. She was trying to understand where they were and what the man was going to do to her. Sin wanted to go home, but Sun didn't listen to her and tried to convince the girl that she had drunk too much and knew what they were doing in the hotel. Sun grabbed his victim by the chin and told her that they would sleep together today. The girl wouldn't give up so easily and pushed the man away from her. Soon a crazy smile appeared on Sun's face as he said that he didn't expect the victim to have the strength to resist. He began to speak perverted words to the girl. Then Sun took the girl by the hand and said that she couldn't escape because there were too many of his people around. The protagonist's wife felt disgusted and tried to fight him. The girl understood that she needed to resist with all her strength. At the first opportunity, she bit the man on the ear. This annoyed him, and he pulled the girl by the hair, then shouted that if she continued, she would meet a terrible end. Sun strangled the girl, saying that she was to blame for not wanting to marry him. Shin at that moment could only think about her husband. Suddenly, the protagonist appeared at the door of the room. Sun did not recognize the man and shouted that he entered the wrong place. The hero was intimidating only with his appearance and promised Sun that he would send his entire family to the cemetery if he touched in again. The girl couldn't believe her husband was in front of her. Sun quickly received a punch from Lin in the face and flew to the ground. Sun carefully examined the unexpected guest and tried to understand how a guy in a wheelchair could come here. But he continued to sit on the ground and decided to admit defeat. Now, in addition to the abrasion on his cheek, Sun also had a black eye on his face. He was sure that the two of them were conspiring against him. This absurd assumption angered the protagonist. Suddenly, Sun stood up with trembling legs and assured that he would be rescued now. For some reason, the man felt superior and began to say that such a cripple would never deal with someone like him. The man threatened Lin, saying that he would harm his wife and daughter if he dared to touch him. The protagonist couldn't stand it and asked what kind of nonsense he was talking about. Lin decided that this time he would limit himself to just a warning. At that moment, Sun took out his phone and promised that he would soon find out which one was the true non-entity. Sun's hand was immediately intercepted. Then Lin asked if this was the hand he touched Chin with. Lin started to twist the guy's arm, and he felt terrible pain and said that his family would not let his end pass so easily. In response to this statement, the protagonist hit him. The man fell to his knees and Lin expressed that he didn't care about his influential family. Then the protagonist walked away and promised that if the guy caused trouble again, he would have no mercy. At that moment, Shin felt her eyelids getting heavy, and it was difficult to stay conscious. The husband approached her and took off his jacket to cover her. Lin promised that now he was around and everything would be fine. But these words couldn't calm her down completely, so she reminded him that he would go to prison for murder. Sun began to rejoice at the girl's words. He felt confident again and began to tease Lin. The protagonist approached again and said that in his eyes Sun was not a person, then again pushed him to the ground. Sun began to beg for mercy, but the protagonist replied that he would not destroy him for now as he still has some use. After that, Lin took her foot off the man. His whole body trembled as he asked what Lin wanted. The hero looked at the man who dared to bring his wife against her will to a hotel room. Then he said that he would now teach Sun a lesson. The man tried to convince Lin to retreat, but the prota's foot stepped on the man's most vulnerable point, causing him to scream in pain. After that, the protagonist felt that his duty had been fulfilled and could leave Sun writhing on the ground. Then he took his wife in his arms and she regained consciousness. The girl looked at Lin and was happy that he saved her. Sin was very afraid that in the end this was just a dream. But the husband promised that it was not a dream and apologized for being late. Then he soon kissed the girl, then called Ching, saying that he would take his wife home to be examined by a doctor. Ching smiled happily. In just 2 years, the world forgot about Supreme Lin after the accident, but now he has recovered and started to show his comeback by destroying Sun's family. After some time, Lin entered the room and saw that her daughter was still sleeping. He leans on the mattress and the girl felt a man's hands. Then she woke up. Suddenly, Ray saw her father and hugged him, crying. She admitted that she was very afraid of not seeing him again. The girl was worried about her father's health, but the man convinced her that he was just tired and that it was time for them to sleep. Her mother would come back a little later. The man was about to go to the bedroom when the girl grabbed his hand. Ray looked upset and was tormented by the question if her father would leave during the night because he had already lied to her. Then the protagonist confessed to the little girl that his plans had changed and now under no circumstances should she tell that he woke up. Ray promised that she wouldn't even tell her mother, so she and her father swore to keep the secret. Meanwhile, a doctor from a hospital was carefully reviewing the exams of one of the patients. She arrived at Sun's room and said that the only way out for him was surgery, but the risks to his life were too high. The young heir believed that his days were numbered. Suddenly, the doctor said that his only option was amputation. This terrible news made the guy scream all over the hospital, promising to make Lin pay for it. Meanwhile, Shin was sleeping peacefully in his room. His daughter was patiently waiting for her. At that moment, Ixin opened her eyes and realized that she was in the room. Then she heard Ray's voice and her head automatically became dizzy. Her daughter laughed happily and said that her mother was a real sleeper. At that moment, Ixin remembered the events of last night and immediately looked at her husband. Then she saw him in the wheelchair as always. Then she started to cry because she believed that everything was just a dream, and who saved her was another man. Ray took his mother's face in his little hands and asked her not to cry, because her father would definitely protect them. Suddenly, Xin's mother entered the room demanding an explanation from her daughter about who gave her the pill. Shin hugged her daughter and said that Sun put something in her wine, but someone managed to save her. The woman turned around and was ready to deal with the one who dared to invade her daughter's honor, but stopped abruptly and asked if Sin was really talking about Sun. The protagonist's wife was 100% sure of the man's guilt. Then she confirmed her words. But her sister went against her and replied that this was all a misunderstanding. It was also useless for Sun to do this, since Ixin was going to marry him. Jiang wanted to protect Sun because she was the one who took her sister to that bar and no one could find out. At that moment, their mother says that Ixin must be mistaken. Then Ray got very angry, shouted to his grandmother that the mother never lies. The old woman threatened the child with her fist and reminded her that she should be quiet when adults speak. The protagonist was very angry, but still could not expose himself. At that moment, the woman's phone rang and she felt a small wave of fear. Sun himself called her, and she didn't know what to do. The woman picked up the phone and answered. Sun said that Shin should meet him at his house, or else everyone in the Jian's family would disappear. The conversation ended there. Shin's mother begged her to admit the mistake and apologize to save the family. The girl was very upset with the family's attitude, but was forced to accept it. Ray did not like the fact that her mother was forced to apologize to the aggressor. She thought it was unfair. After some time, Lin and Ray were alone. The girl asked her father to tell her mother that he was fine. The protagonist asked her daughter to push him to the park, because he will fight the bandits and teach a lesson so that mom is not scolded by grandma. That was the main objective. Ray was very happy about it, and the protagonist reminded her that it would still remain a secret. Meanwhile, Sun's father observes his son's state. His wife cried, saying that she couldn't allow anyone to do this to her only son. The man got angry and replied that crying doesn't help at all, especially since he believed that the woman had spoiled her son too much. He believed that Sun had grown up to be trash and was ruining the family's reputation because of a woman. Sun tried to convince his father that he had been ambushed. The man was furious at these words of his son and believed that he was an incompetent. The woman believed that her son was right and the Jean's family was planning something against them. The father walked to the window and said that his assumptions were unfounded because the Jean's family was small compared to him, and the man did not consider them dangerous, even though there was someone behind them, but he considered it necessary to interrogate Sin. Sun continued to insist that he was beaten by the cripple of Shin's husband. The father promised that if he finds him, he will tear off his legs and his arms. The conversation between the family members was interrupted. The protagonist appeared in his house and an overwhelming and oppressive aura emanated from him. The hero asked how much trouble they had caused that he needed to hire so many guard dogs. The woman quickly hid behind her husband and he asked who Lin was and why he went to their house. Sun soon got up from the bed and shouted that it was the same Lin who assaulted him. The father saw that the protagonist dared to break into his house and said that he had a lot of courage. The hero looked at all the people in this room with disdain in his eyes and considered that they were not worthy of his wife's apology. Sun's father raised his hand and ordered his men to immediately seize the insolent man. However, Lin said with a satisfied smile that his people were not able to stand up, but he could give him time to call the others. The man was furious and promised that he would not get away with all this. He tells the protagonist that he has one last chance to try to save his life. Lin was only annoyed by such regrettable threats and asked the man if he was so sure of his words. Then the protagonist crossed the room and ended up behind the man who dared to threaten him. Soon Lin hit the head of the family in the face and he fell to the floor. The protagonist quickly explained that he could get away with anything. The woman watched all this and panicked like her husband. She even wanted to shout something at him, but he was silent and covered his mouth with his hand. As soon as Lin looked in his direction, the man tried to get up from the ground while saying that he didn't care who was behind Lin, because he would eliminate everyone. The protagonist appeared in front of the man and said that he was as trash as his son. Sun watched his father's opponent in fear and thought with horror that the guy didn't look like a human. Lin emitted a demonic aura that made his opponents tremble in fear. The hero lifted the old man by the throat and heard screams begging for mercy. The woman threw herself at Lin's feet and promised to pay any amount. Sun also realized that without his father the company would end, so he started begging him to let him go, promising not to bother Shin. Lin says that all his persuasion to resolve the conflict peacefully sounded simply ridiculous. Then he threw the man aside. The father found himself on the floor trying to clear his throat while his wife was worried. At that moment, Lin gave the family a day to offer their sincere apologies to Eanes, otherwise his family would disappear. He also ordered them not to tell anyone that they had seen him, because in this case they would also disappear. The father heard the boy's conditions and felt a wave of anxiety from his last words. The office door closed and the family was left alone again. The head of the family felt humiliated and was not going to let Lin get away with it. These feelings made him furious and he wanted to find people to end the Jian's family as soon as possible. He got up from the ground and started making all the necessary calls while his wife checked the hallway of their house. But instead of giving orders, the old man was forced to hear that there was bad news for him. It turns out that all investors stopped cooperating with money and banks stopped issuing loans. The phone fell out of the old man's hands, and he didn't understand how his company with hundreds of millions could fail in just one day. Sun was wrapped in a blanket and tried to ask his father what they should do now. But the man was very involved in thoughts about Lin's origins and how he could do such a thing. Sun also didn't understand how this was possible since the Jian's family needed his money. At that moment, the father threw the blanket away and shouted that his corporations were his life's work, so Sun should take the money and run to apologize to Sin. Sun didn't fully believe that his own father was forcing him to apologize. The man was so furious that he started shaking Sun and shouting that if the girl didn't forgive him, he would destroy him. Meanwhile, Ixin's mother came out of the house and ordered her to agree to all of Sun's family's demands, otherwise they would be screwed. Sin didn't feel strong enough to argue with his mother, so he obediently agreed with her. They walked towards the gate while the woman wanted Sin to put on a more benevolent expression, but they didn't have time to leave because outside the gate was the young master's son. He was sitting on his knees. Shin's mother tried to lift the guy to his knees and convince him that it was her own daughter's fault. But Sun threw Lee's hand and started shouting that yesterday's situation was just his fault, and begged her to forgive him. Shin began to think that this was some kind of trap. The boy took the girl's skirt and begged for forgiveness, promising that he would never bother her again. The protagonist's wife felt disgusted and said that she would only forgive the guy if he never bothered her again. Sun began to cry with happiness and swore that he would not bother her. This reaction surprised her and she did not find out what caused her words. In addition to verbal apologies, the boy gave a check for 1 million as moral compensation. Lee wasted no time and immediately took the check. While Sin only said he didn't want to see the man again, Sun quickly left. Lee tried to find out from his daughter who helped her deal with a family as influential as Sun's, but the girl had no answers to her mother's questions. The woman thought about it and came to the conclusion that they were helped by yesterday's savior, who proved to be quite influential. Sun ran away from the Jian's family home and hoped that everything would be fine now and he would correct the situation. However, he came across Lin and her young daughter. The protagonist looked at Sun with a menacing look. The young man reported that Shin accepted his apology and asked if there would be any more orders. Lin just said that she hoped they would never meet again. The guy was about to leave when Lin's voice made him stop. The protagonist just wanted to remind him that if he told others about him, his whole family would be destroyed. Out of fear, Sun fell to his knees and shouted that he would definitely keep Lin a secret. Meanwhile, Xin's mother kept saying that she better divorce that loser because there are a lot of good men out there, so there's no reason for her to keep this useless husband. She tried to manipulate the girl and pressured her to think about her feelings. At this time, Ray returned home with his father and found his mother. Sin was surprised when she saw her daughter and Lin. Ray replied that she took her father to sunbathe. The protagonist's wife immediately began to hug her daughter. She praised the girl and said how smart he was. But the old woman did not support her daughter's joy and made a disdainful sound in her direction. The girl leaned over to her mother and whispered that her father had dealt with the bad uncles. But that was just their secret. Sin looked at her daughter, shocked by her words, but right after she laughed and promised to take her alone to school. After some time, Ray got ready to go to school and saw his father before leaving to see if he was okay. Lin observed his family and felt happy to be involved in their lives even in this state. As soon as the girls left, King entered. A second later, the main character asked the woman to take him out of the house because he wanted to see his daughter go to school. After some time, we see Ray. She tells her mother that she wanted her father to pick her up from school. Sin promised a reward for good behavior. At that moment, Xiaohu's family stood at the school gate. The family members smugly blocked the passage. Sin hugged her daughter closely and prepared to defend herself. She asked why they were here. The man pointed to his own forehead and blamed Lin for her injury. Then he promised that this time they would not come out so easily. The woman wanted to receive 200,000 for moral damages. Then she held Xiao, who took her child, and said that the child did not eat and lost weight in the last 2 days out of fear. Xiaohu's father had no intention of backing down. Sin quickly replies that this is impossible. Because Lin is in a wheelchair, the man approached and started shouting that she could believe him or not, but he would finish off her ex. Ray approached and shouted that if he continued, she would call her father. At that moment, the man felt Lin's frightening aura again and decided that he didn't want to be beaten again. So he took his family and ran away. His wife didn't understand why they were running away if the man had promised to deal with the disabled guy, but the head of the family had a bad feeling, and the protagonist told himself that he would have another chance in the future. At that moment, Xin leaned over to his daughter and explained that she needed to go. Soon Principal Yang appeared next to the school gate and said that she needed to talk to Xian. She didn't know what he had to talk about. Yang suggested going to the office and discussing everything there. The girl thought that this had to do with her daughter. They finally arrived at the office. Then Yang informed him that Ray's academic contract was ending this year and the plans for next year needed to be discussed. Xin didn't understand how this could happen if they agreed that it would be 2 years. But only 6 months had passed. The director hesitated and started talking about the limited number of seats and the lack of reservations. But Xin reminded the man that she had paid him 50,000 when they closed the deal. The man sat down and explained that 50,000 was an advance payment for admission. This annoyed Xin a lot since she paid this money for the first year of study. But the director only laughed. He believed that she had fallen for his trick. Then Yang began to talk that he could help get a place in the school. The first would be to pay him 1 million and added that his commission will be added to this amount. The man understood that this option would not work for the girl because he knew that she did not have that kind of money. Xin was ready to listen to the second option. Yang put her feet on the table and said that she had heard about her husband's condition and hoped that he didn't need to explain the details of the second method. Xin was furious at the principal's words. She slammed her hands on the table and called him disgusting. Yang adjusted her glasses and said that her daughter would not be able to attend the preparatory school on her terms. Xin would not fall for this man's schemes and decided that he would send his daughter to another school. Yang was annoyed and said that none of the prep schools in the city would accept his daughter without his permission. So Yang shouted that the girl would come back tomorrow and beg. Meanwhile, King told the protagonist that this school has a good environment and Xin paid a lot of money so that his daughter could study here. Suddenly, one thing caught his attention. Qing turned Lin to the exit of the school and he saw his wife running away in tears. He immediately realized that something had not gone according to plan in the principal's room and decided to take a look on his own. At that moment, Aishao, whose father appeared in front of the principal. Yang got nervous and put a smile on his face. He tried to pretend that he was very happy to see this family. But in fact, the man just didn't want to ruin the relationship with Jiu because he is one of the richest in the place. They quickly expressed that they wanted to expel a little girl from school. The principal realized that they were talking about Ray and said so at the end of the semester, she would no longer attend school. However, the family was not happy with this decision, and Jiu promised to pay 1 million if the girl left immediately. The principal promised to solve the problem as soon as possible and was happy that he could make a fortune so easily. At that moment, the door of the board opened with a loud bang. Everyone immediately looked at Lin. The director didn't understand who he was dealing with and tried to show his power. The mere appearance of Lin made the couple tremble with fear because they already knew him. But Yang didn't pay attention to the situation and tried to find out what this man was doing here. Joe received another severe slap in the face and his wife was sure that now they would go base. The director was starting to get nervous but still tried to send Lin away. He was unsuccessful, and was really scared when Lin promised to cut out his tongue if he spoke one more word. After that, the protagonist returned to the confrontation with Joe and asked why he stopped swearing. Our hero pinned the man's hands to the ground and informed him that if he dared to touch his wife, he could say goodbye to her hands. Lin also gave a significant look at the woman, and she realized that she was also in trouble. So the woman knelt down and said that they had accepted the mistake. Lin agreed to let the family go only if they left town today. The director didn't understand why Lin had so much power. The family accepted it and ran away soon after. After that, the protagonist sat on the couch and said he was giving the director the opportunity to explain why he was focusing on his daughter. Only after these words did the director realize that the man in his office was Rei's father, but for some reason the director thought he could threaten Lin. He then tried to intimidate him and said that he would only leave his daughter in this institution if his wife slept with him. Lin felt the anger start to boil and immediately got up from the couch, then kicked the man, breaking his glasses. Yang was lying on the floor and holding his cheek. His whole body was shaking, and he couldn't believe what had just happened. Then he took out his phone and shouted in anger that he would make Lin pay for what he had done. But the man didn't have time to call anyone because someone else broke into the office. The director ran in the hope that someone could help deal with the guy, but his boss's face expressed only anger. The school owner found out what the principal did and asked how he could use his power for personal gain. The boss added that he knew what he said to Lin's wife. Yang couldn't believe he was being fired. The boss didn't want to be beaten because of a mistake by his subordinates and fired the principal. He also ordered Yang to leave the city. The headmaster felt defeated and didn't understand how a vegetable could ruin his life. The boss pushed the former headmaster and ordered him to immediately apologize to the master, otherwise he would have a bad end. The boss also apologized to Lin and promised to immediately correct the situation, but this did not impress the protagonist as he was able to deal with his own problems. The boss realized that the former director was still silent and said that he would not save him. Yang then began to actively apologize. The hero leaned over and said that Yang was very mistaken, thinking that he could manipulate people with the help of wealth and power, but from now on he will have no money or home. The only thing he can do is beg. The boss agreed that this was a deserved punishment and promised Lin that his daughter would receive a better education. The man was very happy that the mayor managed to call in time and managed to save his life. Lin decided not to interfere anymore and asked everyone present to keep his appearance a secret. The men promised to remain silent, but this incident made it clear that someone upstairs already knew about his awakening. Meanwhile, Xin walked through the park, thinking that today all the problems fell on her head. At that moment, the younger sister appeared next to her, asking if the girl was going to the company. Xin shared her problem about having to pay $1 million for Rei to continue in school. The younger sister was sure that it was due to lack of status and mentioned son, but this made the protagonist's wife furious. She walked away from her sister and said that from that day on they would break all ties with this family. At that moment, Jiang said that she heard from her mother about her mysterious boyfriend and suggested asking him for help, but Xin asked her not to talk nonsense. Jiang believes that his sister is stupid, mainly because she wants to continue with a man who doesn't move instead of finding someone influential. After the brief conversation, Jiang left, leaving her sister to deal with her problems alone. After some time, Jiang went to a nearby cafe with Sun. The girl saw his condition and thought he was sick. Sun got angry and thought that Jiang could harm him. Jiang didn't understand why the guy was angry at her. She says that she just wanted to remind him that he shouldn't be left behind if he wanted to get his sister. Sun smiled and said that the girl really wants to take him to the grave. The younger sister remembered that the man had competition and said that she considered him the best candidate. After these words, Sun thanked him, and at the same time he looked very scary. Jiang decided that she no longer needed to be by his side and said that since he had given up, she was leaving. Sun saw the girl leave and called her friend, saying that there was a good job for them. At that moment, Jiang walked down the street and thought it was surprising how quickly the young heir would give up. The girl was very upset when she realized that she would not receive her bag. Suddenly, 2 guys were following her, but the blonde did not pay much attention. The boys looked at the girl carefully and thanked Sun for the work. They promised that they would have a lot of fun using Jiang. After that, they appeared in front of the girl, laughing and asking if she was walking here alone. Jiang was scared and couldn't understand what these 2 men wanted with her. The guys examined her body and laughed, saying that they wanted her body. At that moment, King asked the protagonist if she should save the girl, but he decided to teach Jiang a lesson first. Lin knew that the blonde was ready for anything for money, but even so, she was his wife's family, so he would see if she really needed his help. Meanwhile, the boys took the girl to an alley and she begged to be released, promising to pay any money. But Sun had already paid for the work, and they didn't want to waste such an amazing opportunity to have fun. Jiang heard Sun's name and didn't understand why the one she helped would want to harm her. Then the girl screamed, trying to escape, but her loud screams only made the guys happy. The girl had her clothes torn and the boys could see. Jiang cried and begged for help. At this moment, Qing, as an excellent warrior, was able to neutralize the white-haired guy with one blow, and then just as easily knocked out her partner. Jiang was sitting on the ground covering her body. Qing looked at the girl she saved and said not to thank her. She ordered Jiang not to interfere in her older sister's affairs, otherwise she wouldn't come anymore to help. After these words, the girl left the alley and left Jiang alone. The girl was still crying and thought seriously why this woman called her sister ma'am, and especially who was the master who sent her. Jiang covered her body and felt guilty for forcing her sister to stay with Sun. Meanwhile, Qing was once again by the protagonist's side. They hoped the girl had learned. Qing agreed. Then she told the protagonist that soon she will have the Binhai feast, but Lin denied that she would. At this moment, a guard went to the Sun and informed him that 2 of his men had been eliminated. Lin was very surprised when he realized that the 2 of them had failed the task. The guy wouldn't stop because of a failure and promised himself that Jiang's end was just beginning. The guy saw a great way to deal with Jiang and called his good friend Liu. A lot of time had passed and Binhai's celebration was approaching. At that moment, Sun appeared at Sin's house again. The man assured that he came only with good intentions. Sin's mother didn't notice the strange prank and happily supported the man's words. Sun asked if the girls knew about Binhai's celebration that would take place in 2 weeks. The mother immediately got excited because this celebration was a very important event and the woman hoped that he would take them. Sun replied that his family was not invited, so it was impossible to take her, but he promised to introduce a friend who could take them. Lin's wife did not want to hear more, so she got up from her seat and said she was not interested. Li didn't let his daughter leave and grabbed her with force, asking her to take advantage of such a good opportunity. While the woman tried to convince her daughter, the guy thought that he himself would go to the celebration if Jiang agreed, so he would take the sisters. Suddenly Ray appeared along with his father. Sun didn't expect that this demon would come back so soon, so he was very nervous. At that moment, Sun bowed to the girls and asked them to inform them about the decision as soon as possible. Li believed that it was Jiang's responsibility to accept the invitation. Jiang, that after the recent incident, was in no hurry to trust Sun so willingly. She came down and told her mother about it. But Li was furious because she was sure that the young master would never do that. Jiang didn't argue, but doubts settled in her soul that the criminals would attack her again. At this moment, Igsin says that yesterday her grandfather called her and ordered the girl to go to the main house. Li was not very happy with this prospect, and she did not understand why the man needed her daughter. Sin replies that she did not know the details, but she felt that it was necessary to leave as soon as possible. The main house of the Jian's family was much larger than the country house. The grandfather sat at the head of the table and said disgruntled that the family had not received an invitation to the celebration. The guy noticed that although their business has improved this year, the influential families still do not pay attention to them. The blonde man looked at Sin and hinted that someone could help them attract attention. The girl was very surprised when she realized that even this part of her family depended on her. The grandfather did not worry much about Sin in the last few years, but he reminded her that he always provided money when needed. The old man crossed his hands in front of him and said that he needed the girl to do him a favor. She believed that her grandfather was joking because she honestly didn't understand what she could do. The blonde man asked disdainfully if she didn't want to help the family. The cousin says that the girl pretended not to understand. Sin believed that she couldn't solve a problem that the head of the family couldn't handle. However, the old man explained that an influential person was interested in her and could help them get to the party. Sin felt a growing anxiety and said that no one could be interested in her since she already had a child. The cousin smiled sarcastically and added that the girl should thank her for the opportunity. The uncle also decided to play with it. The protagonist's wife jumped out of her seat and told everyone that she was a married woman, not a toy, but her words had no effect, and the uncle said that it was better to be a toy than to serve a vegetable. Sin tried to defend her husband's honor. The grandfather knocked on the table and promised that if his granddaughter complied with the request, the family would never forget. But the protagonist's wife would not agree. She says she won't allow her to lose her dignity and won't use my body. Shin says she will honor her husband, and if someone wants to go ahead with this plan, then they can go alone. Shin didn't understand how someone could ask for something like that. The old man didn't take no for an answer. At that moment, the cousin began to pressure the girl about the consequences of her actions. But the protagonist's wife remained firm, believing that only she had the right to decide what to do with her body. Suddenly, the cousin began to threaten Shin, saying that something could happen to her husband. It seemed that this girl was jealous of Shin's beauty, and she kept asking what people saw in her. She took the opportunity to push Shin on the table, then threw her to the ground. At this point, the cousin shouted that this was her last chance for Sin to make the right decision, and added that the lives of her loved ones would depend on it. Although it was painful for the protagonist's wife, she agreed to give up her principles for the sake of her daughter's and husband's safety. The grandfather waved his hand in her direction and promised to save his family's life if the girl received an invitation to the celebration. The frustrated girl left the main house of the Jian's family. After some time, Sin returned home and immediately went to the park with her husband. The girl was sitting on a swing and decided to tell her husband what her grandfather had said. Sin told Lin that someone influential was interested in her, and she knew that she was obliged to entertain him if she did not want to bring problems to the protagonist and his daughter. The girl unfortunately said that she would have to get a ticket, because otherwise they would destroy her family. The blonde hugged her husband, saying that she did not want to cheat on him, but she knew that she was not ready to lose them, so she apologized to Lin, because that was the only way she could protect them. The protagonist was furious with this treatment of his wife, and his hands were illuminated with blue fire. Then Lin put his wife to sleep and sat her on the chair. The protagonist promised that he would catch everyone who dared to intimidate his wife. After that, King instantly appeared nearby. She bowed and she was ready to carry out any request. Lin decided that she would not hide anymore, that she woke up and ordered Qing to inform everyone about her presence at the Binhai celebration. Meanwhile, Xin's mother was confused when she saw her father at her house. At that moment, the cousin introduced a guy named Liu Shao. The guy sat next to Li and started smoothing her hair while she tried to understand what was happening. At that moment, the grandfather asked her to call Xin soon, because they couldn't leave a person as influential as Liu waiting. Li explained that the daughter took Ray to school, then decided to ask why they were there. The cousin reported that Liu Shao liked Xin, so if the girl didn't bring trouble, the Jian's family wouldn't need anything else. Li was very happy. The cousin contemptuously told him that it was all thanks to her grandfather's efforts. After a few minutes, the sisters returned home. Liu Shao began to look at the girls' bodies and praised Kusinyan's choice. Jiang's joy diminished when she saw her grandfather, who had previously promised that he would leave them alone. The grandfather introduced Liu and said that he was the one Xin should accompany. The man cleared his throat and said he was looking forward to their new meeting. Li approached the eldest daughter and ordered her not to waste this great opportunity. The grandfather was dissatisfied with his granddaughter's behavior because she didn't greet the guest, but Liu didn't consider it something terrible and added that shyness on the first date is completely normal. The guy decided to introduce himself first and started to say which company he owned, but Xin walked away in disdain. The old man restrained himself with all his strength not to put Xin in his place. Liu didn't like the attitude and asked if the family wasn't welcoming him. Cousin Yan hit Xin and shouted that she was just any for allowing herself to behave like this. The girl stood up over the protagonist's wife and demanded that she immediately apologize to Liu. At that moment, Yan was interrupted by Liu, and he said that getting tickets became much more difficult. Xin sat on the couch and covered his cheek, while being threatened that with this attitude they might not receive an invitation. The cousin clung to Liu and assured that grandfather would solve everything. Suddenly, a threatening smile appeared on Liu's face, and he added that he would need one more person. Then Li replied that Jiang would also go with him. Jiang didn't like this news very much, but the grandfather just lit a cigarette and told the boy that he could take the two sisters with him. Li yelled at Jiang because the girl didn't want to go, and explained that Xin would protect her from trouble. Liu hugged the confused girl to himself and ordered the sisters to go with him. The man believed that it would only be beneficial for the girls to accompany him for one night and receive his reward. Xin didn't want to participate in it, but the guy reminded her of the safety of his daughter and husband. Liu was happy to see how the beauty obeyed the family rules and threw away her principles. Our main character watched this scene carefully, hiding behind the wall of the stairs. Then he called Qing and ordered them to cancel the invitation of the Jian's family and invite only Xin. Meanwhile, outside the house, the sisters approached the gate and Liu was about to leave the house, but Qing appeared in front of him and ordered him to stop. Liu didn't understand who the girl was, but Qing said that the boy couldn't take the girl with him to the celebration. The girl was serious and told him to prepare for a tragic end. The guy assumed that the beauty in front of him was simply jealous and also wanted a ticket to go to the celebration, but his mood dropped instantly when Qing reported that his invitation was disqualified. Jiang watched the girl and wondered who she was because she always shows up to save them. Liu didn't believe that a family with a multi-billion-dollar fortune couldn't be invited and thought that the girl in front of him was just an actress. Qing is tired of talking to this guy. At this moment, Xin asked Qing not to worry. Liu had no intention of letting the sisters leave and threatening to make Xin crawl on his knees in front of him. Qing couldn't tolerate the insult and slapped him hard in the face. The guy fell to the ground and looked screaming in anger. He shouted that after this offense she would be destroyed, but Qing naturally threatened to cut out his tongue. Suddenly, the old grandfather appeared in the courtyard. He was angry because he knew that his family would probably miss the invitations. Lin's wife was confused when the old man blamed her, and she replied that she had no influence with what happened. The man wanted to yell at her but was interrupted by Qing's screams. The girl repeated that Liu had no invitations and was disqualified from attending the event. In addition to this information, the girl conveyed to them that of the entire Jin's family, only Xin was invited to Binhai's celebration. This surprised everyone present, especially Grandfather Elder, who didn't know the Master Lin guy the girl had mentioned. Qing bowed his head to Xin and promised that an exclusive invitation would be delivered to her soon. The old man didn't believe the girl because he didn't believe that exclusive invitations were given to people on the street. At that moment, a man appeared near the gate and said he had to deliver an invitation to Gen. The grandfather couldn't doubt this man's words, but he couldn't understand how Xin could be invited. Liu got up from the ground and recognized the man like Wang. The guy didn't expect to see him here. Liu told everyone that this man was the organizer of the Binhai celebration, so now he would prove that he was invited. But Wang looked at the beaten man and asked who he was and why he was acting so rudely. Liu pointed to himself and reminded himself that he was the heir of the Liu family. The organizer of the celebration recalled that this year Liu's family could not attend. The old elder received confirmation that Liu's family was deprived of participating in the celebration by the organizer himself. At that moment, Wang asked his assistant to expel Liu so that he would not bother the master. After that, the man smiled sweetly and took the letter at the same time, wondering who Xin was. The protagonist's wife was very worried when she saw that that man was looking for her. But Wang bowed and extended an exclusive invitation sent by Mr. Lin and asked the girl to go to the celebration. Xin accepted the invitation and asked if this Lin was the same person who rented the hotel for her. The man confirmed that this was not the first time Lin gave lavish gifts to the lady. Jian thought that if her sister married this master, they would never have problems again, so she asked if they could meet him. Meanwhile, the protagonist observed the situation from his bedroom window and thought that his wife's younger sister really had a short memory. Soon Wang explained to the girl that the Lord had many important things to do now, and he had no time for guests. King looked carefully at the blonde and reminded her that she should not interfere in Xin's affairs. Jiang felt the seriousness of King's words and trembled with fear. Then, after slightly annoyed, she replied to King that her sister would not let go of her husband. The organizer soon replied that his work was done and bowed before Xin. King reminded him that his duties were done and he should go. Suddenly, the old man approached his granddaughters and tried to find out who this master was who was at Xin's birthday party. Cousin Yan quickly took the girl's note and asked ironically what method she used to conquer this guy. Yan believed that only she was worthy of going to the celebration. But Xin didn't want to give up her seat because she really wanted to check if this master was her husband. But the grandfather stressed out, saying that Xin insisted on putting her husband and daughter above her family. He really wanted Xin to abandon the protagonist and focus on making them rich. Moreover, the old man believed that Lin had become a burden to his family, so Xin allowed the invitation to be withdrawn as long as his family was not affected. Yan was happy because he believed that Xin was not worthy of an invitation. At this moment, the protagonist and King watched this scene. Lin's servant really wanted to come back and teach them a lesson, but the hero forbade her to do so and promised that in the future he would make them regret their existence. At that moment, King's phone rang. The school principal says that Ray had been sent to the hospital. Lin heard that her daughter had lost consciousness and ordered Qing to start the car immediately. Then, after a few minutes, they arrived at Binhai Central Hospital, where they brought Ray unconsciously. The doctor carefully examined the test results. Qing and Lin entered the room, asking how the girl was feeling. The doctor replied that he ruled out other options and found that the girl had a relapse of an old disease. Lin sat on the bed and asked if it would be possible to transplant bone marrow to save her again. But the doctor decided that first they should invite Dr. Li to come see Ray. The protagonist was very surprised that Dr. Lai was in town. The doctor replied that Lai came back as soon as he heard the rumor about the master's awakening and is now in the hospital. Lin immediately sent her servant to find the doctor and ordered him to go brought quickly. At this moment, the doctor decided to ask if the protagonist knew the severity of Ray's illness. Lin replies that he was seriously injured at that time and did not fully understand his daughter's condition. The doctor says that it turns out that 2 years ago Ray awakened the imperial and royal lineage at the same time. So that's why he fell into a coma. The protagonist was scared and couldn't believe his ears, but Dr. Li appeared in the room and assured him that the big man had nothing to worry about because he had come to help the princess. The old man was so happy to see Lin again, so much so that tears appeared in his eyes. This reaction made the men in the room feel uncomfortable and they looked at each other in silence. The god of war decided to return to the main conversation because he was worried about blood fusion in his daughter. Normally, no royal and imperial bloodline would appear in the same person, but Dr. Li says that nowadays there are only 3 people who have both bloodlines. The protagonist knew that he had both, and there was also another boy in the capital. But he wondered who was the third person he had never heard of before. Li waited for a dramatic pause, and then with a burst of energy revealed that the third person is Ray. Then the doctor's aura flew around her. The protagonist didn't like it said, and shouted Qing's name. The girl imperceptibly moved behind the old man. Qing held his palm next to his neck and asked the master to explain himself more clearly before touching the girl. Li says that Lin's royal bloodline was personally forbidden years ago and shouldn't have affected his daughter, then asked if the god of war wanted to know why this was happening. Lin was unsure where the imperial bloodline came from and allowed Qing to let the doctor go. The old man promised that if the girl was by his side, no one would recognize her as a descendant of the imperial bloodline. Lin really expected that and decided to trust Dr. Li for now. King remembered that the school also had to notify Xin and she would soon be here. The protagonist realized it was time to leave and told Li that he would know what to explain to Insin. Soon after, the protagonist's wife ran through the hospital corridors as fast as she could. She was very nervous and didn't even pay attention to Sun. The guy wanted to know what she was doing here, but the friend got mad because he didn't want any trouble. Sun received a slight blow to his friend's head and admitted that this time he had nothing to do with it. He guessed that the girl was worried about the child. Liu didn't understand why they needed this information, and then Sun explained that Shin would definitely need money for the treatment. Liu knew the poor state the Jian's family was in and prepared to use his chance to make the blonde beg for him. At that moment, ᴄᴏᴘ burst into the room and asked worriedly what happened to her daughter. Li asked the woman to be quiet so as not to wake up the little princess. The girl did not expect to see a second doctor besides Shen, so she asked who he was. Dr. Chen introduced his mentor and promised that Ray was safe. Then he snapped his fingers and Ray began to turn around in his bed again. Li said that the girl would soon wake up thanks to acupuncture. Suddenly, Ray opened his eyes and tried to find his father in the room. Because he was sure he heard his voice, the mother appeared next to her saying that she fainted at school. So she was lucky enough to meet this doctor who uses traditional Chinese medicine. Ray recognized the man as a brilliant doctor. The old man couldn't contain his feelings and said that the baby was very kind to him. The man leaned over to the girl and started hugging her. Sin was worried that she wouldn't be able to pay for the doctor's appointment because her family wouldn't give her a dime. The man noticed her concerns and said that he would not receive payment from her, since he came in the name of Mr. Lin. At that time, Ray realized that he wasn't imagining things and actually heard his father's voice. Shin quickly asked if the doctor could tell him who this Mr. Lin was and why he is always helping her. Li couldn't tell the secret, so he just said that Lin is the supreme lord of the southern border and she will find out the details when it's time. Then the doctor returned the girl to bed and handed her mother a business card, ordering her to call if necessary. Now that Ray woke up, the man was convinced that she was okay, so he could say goodbye and leave the infirmary. The girl called her mother and confessed that Dr. Li was invited by her father, and she heard his voice while she slept. Although Sin normally didn't believe her daughter's words, she decided to agree because she wanted the great Lord Lin to really be her husband, even because she had never met this unknown man, and Lin's personality would explain a lot. What really bothered her about this theory was the fact that the protagonist didn't directly tell her that he had woken up. Ray noticed that her mother was thinking about something, and these thoughts bothered her a lot. But the woman pretended that nothing bothered her. She winked at her daughter and said that they would go home. Suddenly, Dr. Chen intervened, saying that the little princess should remain under observation for a few more days. Xin was worried about the possibility of having to leave Ray alone in the hospital, but her daughter seemed inspired and promised her mother that she could have some alone time. After that, the girl remained in the hospital and waited for her recovery. Meanwhile, the protagonist was still in the hospital and asked his subordinate if she had found information about the head of the Jian's family. King wasted no time and managed to find something strange in a short period of time. The girl reported that everyone in the family was ordinary people, but Shin's father had something different. The protagonist recalled that he met his wife's father only once and soon after he ended up passing away. The subordinate confirmed the information and said that she discovered rumors that believed he was not the heir. Lin became interested in this information and realized that if this was true, then the status of his wife's father is in question. Li said that with the help of his position in society, he was able to discover that the emperor had light-haired heirs. This fact could mean that Axin's father was a descendant of the emperor, but it was impossible to know for sure. The old man admitted that he wanted to accept the princess as a disciple. Lin allowed the man to teach the girl how to control her abilities and asked him what else he needed. So Li asked Lin to allow him to enter the Binhai celebration. He really wanted to see Lin return. Meanwhile, Xin had no choice and had to leave her daughter at the hospital, so she asked the girl to listen to Dr. Chen. ᴄᴏᴘ promised Ray that she would definitely come after work. The mother assured her that everything would be fine and then said goodbye. Suddenly, Chen receives a call from her cousin. The protagonist's wife didn't understand what more she could want if she already took the invitation. Yan ordered the girl to go to the company now. After half an hour, Xin went to the office. When he approached the finance department, he heard loud screams. Yan was inside with a cup of coffee and shouted furiously at the employees, asking what they were doing there. Xin didn't want to see his cousin, but she needed to find out why they were looking for her. The girl turned to Shin and was surprised that she was asking such stupid questions. Yan said that ᴄᴏᴘ was a financial manager and was away from work with the company in crisis. Then she threw coffee at Sin, but the woman managed to dodge and remembered that she had asked for time off today. Yan didn't believe it and promised to deduct half a month's salary and added that next time she will throw it away. Shin tried to argue, but it was no use because the girl believed that her company was in crisis because of people like Shin. The blonde did not consider that the crisis was on her shoulders and remembered that all accounts go through Yan. The cousin realized the accusation and ordered the company to get out of the crisis in 3 days or Sin would be fired. The time was extremely short and Sin thought that Yan was joking, but that was not the case. The cousin repeated that she would fire her if she failed. Yan was pleased with herself and believed that Shin would never deal with it. Meanwhile, Sun was sitting in the office and said that just like Liu Yu, he was also tired of waiting. But he added that Yan promised that there would be no problems with Sin this time. Liu was already anxious to know how he would gain an advantage over the girl. Sun smiled happily and was confident that this time they would succeed, but the friend couldn't relax because he remembered that this wasn't their first plan. Sun replied that he had planned B. If the first one went wrong, then Sun questioned Yan's words, which made the cousin worried, and she replied that she wouldn't tell anyone anything. Yan winked, and the men thought that the genetics of the Jian's family were not fair to her. Liu wanted to know from his friend what his plan was because he wanted to be prepared for anything. Sun said that in Xin's life there are two people important to her in a very small way, and the other is her husband Lin. Meanwhile, the protagonist went to his daughter's room and asked if the girl would accept to become a disciple of Dr. Li. Ray asked if the man would teach her how to heal people. The god of war looked at his daughter with adoration and wanted to say what Li would teach, but he didn't have time because Qing appeared behind him and reported Xin's problems in the company. The Jian's family was planning to confiscate the house to pay for the losses. Lin asked if anyone was behind it. The subordinate reported that several people saw Liu and Sun in the finance department. Ray was afraid for the mother, but the father convinced her that he would take care of the problems himself and that the daughter should recover. King waited for her master's orders and asked if she should bring these too. The protagonist decided that they would deal with them when the time came, but for now they would take care of Xin. Meanwhile, the wife of the god of war sat in her office for hours and couldn't think of a way out of this situation. It turns out that all the partners of the company withdrew their investments, and even the bank refused a loan. The girl was very worried because there was only one day left to solve the problem. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of doors opening, and someone entered Xin's office without knocking. This person was Sun, and he was following his plan by going to the girl at a difficult time for her. The guy behaved relaxed and told the girl that he had come to help her nobly. Xin got up from the table and didn't plan to accept Sun's help. Then she asked him to leave. The man pressured the girl, reminding her that her family was homeless. But even that didn't convince her. The guy said that he always helps others, then said that he wouldn't bother her anymore and walked to the exit. At that moment, he said that if she wanted his help, she should go to the hotel by 9 in the morning. Xin was angry at this behavior and shouted that she would never make a deal with such an unscrupulous person. The boy didn't argue. He just said that he would wait for her tomorrow at the scheduled place. The protagonist's wife noticed that this situation was set up by her cousin and son. At that moment, we see Xin's mother going through a stack of papers. She asked why the company's things were sent to their house. The daughter had no choice and said that Yan would confiscate her house. The woman was furious with the news because problems were constantly falling on her family, but she believed that her daughter would ask that guy named Lin to help them, and that would not be a problem for her. But the protagonist's wife replied that she never even saw this man. Li always began to blame her daughter for all the problems of the family. Xin did not want to disappoint her loved ones, and since the Wang family did not respond to her letter, the girl would have to ask Sun for help. The day of the meeting arrived and the time of the scheduled meeting was approaching. The protagonist's wife arrived at the hotel and saw the right room. She entered and immediately shouted to Sun that she had come, but the man near the window was not Sun. The girl was looking at her feet and didn't notice it. Suddenly, Wang walked away from the window and greeted the girl kindly. Xin saw Wang and concluded that the guy was conspiring with the Sun family to destroy their company. The man approached the blonde and explained that it was a misunderstanding. He said he just doesn't have time and handed him a check. Wang added that Mr. Lin would take care of everything and change the Sun card number with a trick. That's why he was the one who was in this room. Xin was very happy and was sincerely grateful to the person who saved her in this situation. Wang left the room, leaving the girl inside. Then he instantly became serious. He met with the protagonist and reported that his wife's problem had been solved. Now Lin was going to punish the offender. Meanwhile, Liu was sitting in another room. The guy was angry because Xin hadn't come to him yet. He admitted that the girl was hard to break. Liu's phone rang and Yan appeared on the screen, saying that he knew he could kidnap anyone. Suddenly, the guy hears a knock on the door and ran to answer, thinking it was Xin. However, at the door, he saw a completely different girl from what he expected to see. Qing was there and kicked the man in the face very hard. Liu flew back and hit the table, knocking over the dishes. The girl broke the guy's lip with the blow. Liu didn't understand why that strange girl pestered him and constantly appeared next to him. Qing didn't answer him and went back to the corridor, calling Lin. Liu looked at the newcomer and was surprised because the guy looked very familiar to him. The protagonist introduced himself as a soldier who served in the army for many years and became known as the supreme leader of the South. Liu felt his body trembling with fear, and he wondered why the guy was helping Xin. Lin explained that she was his wife and pushed the guy to the ground. Liu didn't believe that a disabled person could come to be the leader of the South. At that moment, the protagonist emitted a powerful aura and said he didn't care if the guy believed him. The man leaned towards Liu and grabbed him by the collar of his t-shirt, lifting the guy in the air. Lin believed that the most important thing now was to make the guy pay for this. Yahello didn't believe that the protagonist would dare to do something with him, because he was one of the richest heirs. But the guy was wrong and flew against the wall with great force. He was seriously injured and no longer had any doubts about the protagonist's position. Then started begging to forgive him, promising to pay any money. Lin looked at the guy and asked if he really looked like someone who needed money. Qing watched with a satisfied smile as his master made the guy feel the consequences of his actions. Liu's arm was broken and the rest of his body hurt, but the protagonist decided to stop and said that this was just a warning. Lin wanted the beaten guy to understand that next time he would not be forgiven. At that moment, the hero was about to leave and is always advised not to talk about his identity. After that, they were walking down the hotel corridor when Qing asked if Lin was afraid of something happening. The protagonist promised that if Liu's family tried something, they would all be ruthlessly annihilated. Suddenly, the girl's phone rang and she paused the conversation. Qing was very scared when Dr. Chen reported that the little princess had been kidnapped and her whereabouts were unknown. Lin was also unhinged by this news and they rushed to the hospital while protecting Xin from this news. They arrived at the infirmary in record time. Dr. Chen was there, and the god of war wanted to know when his daughter disappeared. Chen said that he brought her breakfast and went to prepare for physical therapy. But when he returned, Ray was no longer there. The protagonist hated himself for not being able to prevent the kidnapping of his daughter. Anger filled his body, and he destroyed the floor of the infirmary with one blow. Then Chen fell to his knees and admitted that it was all his fault, and that he should have taken better care of the little princess. But the protagonist said that he doesn't blame him for the kidnapping, because the doctor was busy fulfilling his duties. These words left Chen lost. Then Lin ordered Qing to immediately go to the checkpoint and find the kidnapper. At that moment, a guard was sitting in a small room and was involved in a game. He was sure that he had to win. Just at this moment, Qing appeared behind him. She distracted the game guard and reported the disappearance of the patient, asking to give her the camera footage, but the man demanded more detailed information about the missing person. Qing clarified that the patient is a child and she disappeared about an hour ago. The guard turned to Qing irritably and said that only an hour had passed and they needed to search the hospital first. The man continued to play on his mobile phone and informed him that he would only start the search when a day had passed. Suddenly, a beam of light took the phone out of the guard's hands, scaring the adult man. Lin had no intention of wasting his time, so he was going to do whatever it took. The security guard got angry and shouted that he could not provide records, and besides, the place was forbidden for outsiders to enter. The protagonist released his frightening aura and Qing realized that mugs would possibly roll, so she hurried to stop the master and decided to present a coupon stating that they were members of the imperial family. The guard was speechless when he saw the card that represented the imperial family and was a symbol of the supreme power. Qing strongly recommended that they hurry up and provide the recording. She saw that Lin began to calm down and the guard went to the computer quickly. He began to look for records of the last hour and finally found a moment when they could clearly see Ray sleeping in his room. The protagonist looked carefully at the recording and asked to enlarge the lower panel. The recording showed that a man in a white coat lifted the girl who was sleeping in bed and took her in a direction unknown. The guard looked at the silhouette of the kidnapper and realized that he looked somehow familiar to him. Lin heard this, and the man reported that this man looked like a hospital intern named Zhao Gang. Qing noticed that he had not seen this guy yet. The guard replied that Zhao is not very popular in the institution and entered here through contacts. He added that 2 days ago Zhao came to talk to him and asked about the hospital surveillance. This turn of events complicated the situation. Lin began to lose control of himself again. He gave Qing only 5 minutes to look for Zhao Gang. The girl did not discuss about the deadline and immediately disappeared from the office to comply with the order. The guard sensed the oppressive weather and began to worry that he had done something wrong. Lin's dark mood could be felt from a great distance, so the guard chose not to interfere. The protagonist sat in the chair, and the man tried to understand if the members of the imperial family are always terrified. Qing was soon able to complete the task, and within minutes Zhao was brought to the office. She threw him at Lin's feet and reported that her people found him sneaking through the hospital and immediately grabbed him. The inmate retorted saying that he is a doctor, that's why he was in the hospital. Lin demanded to know where the boy took the child. Zhao pretended that he didn't understand what kind of child they were talking about. The protagonist had no more patience and soon his foot began to press on the kidnapper's shoulder, so hard that the ground began to crack. Lin pressed until Zhao's right hand was completely pressed to the ground. Qing and the guard watched the interrogation. The man was very nervous about the cruelty with which Lin acted. However, the kidnapper could not stand the torture and said that he was hired. The god of war was happy to hear such a statement because now he could give himself a reason to stop trying to control himself. Lin got up from his seat and hit Xiao hard. Although at first glance the blow didn't seem strong. Xiao was badly hurt and spat out red liquid, The protagonist didn't allow the guy to catch his breath and stepped on his chest. Lin pressed the kidnapper to the ground with the help of his leg. Zhao tried to seize the moment and pretend he had lost consciousness. Qing immediately saw through him and asked Lin to let her make him talk, but the protagonist replied that he wasn't going to waste time on such things. The young doctor realized that he only had one chance to survive, so he promised to tell everything and immediately said where he had taken Ray. Zhao could barely speak but said that he put the girl in Sun's car and he took her to his house. Lin wasn't too surprised when he heard that name, but now he was sure that Sun would get his end. Zhao says that Sun forced him to go into the hospital and kidnap the girl. Then he asked for him to be released, but Lin believed that the guy had made a terrible mistake and not even exterminating him is enough. After that, the protagonist asked Qing to handle the kidnapper's body and then follow him to Sun's house. Meanwhile, Sun's property was quiet. Ray was tied to a chair and she yelled for her uncle to let her go. She added that she was sure that the police would arrest the man. However, Sun laughed, saying that without evidence, no one would dare to break into the home of an influential family. Sun was a disgusting person and blamed Zin for his actions. The man believed that he had to repay the girl for ruining her health. Sun pulled her cheeks and the girl said that her mother had never done anything wrong. Ray kept resisting because he was sure that his father would soon appear and save her. Sun hit the girl's forehead because she dared to mention Lin in front of him. He says that this garbage was the cause of his suffering. Ray began to cry loudly and suddenly heard a noise of glass breaking. The protagonist appeared behind Sun and immediately hit him in the face. The wall broke and he fell to the ground. The girl saw her father, and the tears immediately stopped flowing from her eyes. Ray was happy to see Lin, and he started to untie her from the chair, promising the girl that everything would be fine. The girl told her father that she was waiting for him, and the man began to carefully examine his daughter, looking for injuries. The girl told that the bad uncle managed to hit her in the forehead, but as soon as the father arrived, the pain went away. Lin picked up Ray and asked if she was ready to teach the bandit a lesson. The little girl replied that she was ready. Sun trembled when the girl told her father that she didn't remember which hand her uncle hit her with, but she said it was very painful. Sun decided to take advantage of the moment and try to run outside. He wondered how Lin found him so quickly. The god of war listened carefully to his princess's story and drew his own conclusions from it. Sun was already near the exit and believed that he would be saved as soon as he ran out into the street, because he believed that Lin wouldn't hit him in front of everyone. But the guy didn't take into account the fact that Lin was considered the god of war, and his speed surprised people's minds. That's why Sun's escape failed, and now he will have to accept the punishment. Lin looked at the kidnapper scared and said she didn't remember letting him out. Every second, Sun realized the gravity of his offense and was overcome by horror. He decided to try to fight back and aimed at the hand with which the protagonist held his daughter. Then Sun ran as fast as he could and asked for help, hoping that his parents would save him. Naturally, he could run a lot because Lin held the guy tightly by the hand. Then, with a skillful movement, he twisted Sun's arm, causing him to scream in pain. Ray covered his ears and complained to his father that that man was too noisy. The protagonist promised that now the bad uncle would be silent, and immediately a blue flame appeared in his left hand. This fire was directed at Sun, and he screamed loudly, causing the girl to close her eyes. Sun's eyes darkened, and instead of screams, almost inaudible squeaks escaped from his mouth, and he fell to the ground. At that moment, Lin heard the scream of the head of the family. The man broke into the room and begged to spare his son. The father looked in shock at his son's state and realized that everything was very bad. His chest was burned and his whole body was covered with bruises. His eyes were rolled. Then his father fell to his knees before the god of war and begged him to have mercy and forgive Sun's stupid mistake. But the protagonist was not affected by these words because he did not feel sorry for his daughter. The head of the family knew that they were at a disadvantage. The next moment, screams appeared in the room. Qing reported that everything was fine in the hospital. Ray was frightened by such a sudden appearance, but the father explained that this aunt was his friend and there was no need to be afraid of her. Then Lin handed Ray to Qing to finish off the evil uncles alone. Sun's father couldn't handle the fear. Ray held Qing's shoulders and wished his father to successfully take revenge on Sun. When Ray left the room, the protagonist could show all his power. Ellie remembered that he had shown kindness once before. The head of the family tried to take the blame on himself and hoped to convince Lin to save his life. The god of war reminded the man that he had no right to impose conditions. At this moment, Sun was trying to crawl backwards, but this time his pleas were useless and Lin finished off the guy with one blow. The father couldn't do anything and had to see his own son going base. It all ended when Lin said it was too late to beg for mercy and that he doesn't give anyone second chances. He took advantage of the speed and approached Sun's father, who was still in shock. The hero took the man's head and said that it was better for his family to get out of town inside one day because if they stay, they will be beheaded. The father understood that if he didn't want to go to the next world, he would have to agree with Lin and leave the city. After all these events, on Leah's property, his father broke into the room and was furious, wanting to find out who dared to hit his son. The father promised to tear the culprit to pieces. Liu wanted to complain to his father as always, but suddenly remembered that if he dared to reveal Lin's identity, the man would destroy him. So for the sake of the family's well-being, the guy had to shut up. He became apathetic and admitted that he didn't know what to say. The head of the family also got angry with his son and slapped him hard in the face, saying that Liu should remember that they own the city. Liu wondered if the Jian's family had more power and decided to keep Lin's identity a secret for now. The father considered his son weak but added that his story was unnecessary as he had already hired an investigator. Suddenly a man appeared next to them and reported that he had managed to discover the connection between the culprit and the Jian's family. The father was ready to destroy the entire Jian's family at once. He noticed that the investigator wasn't leaving and assumed he had some more news. He turned out to be right, and the man talked about Sun's murder and added that the killer was the same person who beat Liu. The horror ran through Liu's body, and he was seriously worried that it would be next. His father considered Sun's family a failure for not being able to deal with someone like the Jian's family. The man was completely consumed by the desire for revenge and figured out how to deal with the Jian's family on Benhai's celebration night. After some time, the night came. It arrived and it was time for Xin to pick up her daughter from the hospital. The protagonist's wife entered the room and brought a cake asking how Ray was feeling. But to her horror, her daughter was not in the infirmary. The woman called her daughter in despair, but there was no answer and she was terrified at the idea that something had happened. The cake fell from her weakened hands. In the next second, Xin heard her daughter's voice. She forgot everything and ran to the girl asking about her well-being. Ray didn't want to worry her mother and lied that her father took her to play. Xin asked the girl not to play with strangers. The woman got nervous when her daughter said that Lin was taking her to play. This is because Xin believed that her husband was at home all this time. Qing watched with emotion as the cake was discovered and noticed that Lin's wife valued her daughter's life above her. Lin was nearby and admitted in an anguished voice that Xin was really a good mother. The protagonist was very distressed, saying that he owed her a lot. Then Lin reminded them that it was time for them to go, because this time they are going to the Benhai banquet, so you have to get ready. The protagonist, in his last battle, he was ready to fight until his last breath for the peace of his family. Meanwhile, a man was sitting in the pool and drinking wine calmly. He turned to his subordinate and asked if it was true that the great Lin had awakened. The server confirmed that such rumors circulated, and also information emerged that one of the families had already been expelled by him. The Lord of the Dragons believed that this was just a show to show his importance, but in fact his family had already lost its power. The subordinate was convinced that Lin was a threat to the emperor and suggested getting rid of him. The man got angry with the servant, and without leaving the pool directed his energy towards him. The guy was thrown back and the Dragon Lord said he didn't remember giving such an order. The servant fell down and insisted that it was dangerous for his majesty to leave the god of war alive, but the Dragon Lord believed that Lin could be useful, since he had a good reputation among the people. However, he considered that Lin should be shown somewhere. The subordinate heard the Dragon Lord's words and promised to solve everything. Then the Dragon Lord walked to the center of the pool and extended the hand that did not look human to the spear, but the spear refused to obey and a red lightning began to appear along its entire length. The dragon god was forced to let go of the spear because it rejected him. The lightning bolt from the spear severely wounded the man in his hand. Suddenly he said that as Lin was still alive, so he needed to be visited. At that moment the eyes appeared in the man's unusual hand, and the concentrated power began to appear in his palm. The emperor decided that, since he could not use the artifact, he would simply destroy it. The lightning from God's own spear lit up all around, accompanied by the mad laughter of man. Meanwhile, in Lin's house, all the family members lived a normal life and spent the night calmly. Suddenly, Lin felt something strange and was surprised to realize that the Thunder God's spear had been destroyed. Qing noticed the sudden and drastic change in the protagonist's face and asked what happened. Lin asked about the spear. Qing replied after the border war heard that it was taken by the royal family, but the Lishan spear only recognizes its owner, so it would definitely not be used by third parties. The protagonist replied that the spear had been destroyed a few minutes ago. The girl says that the Lishan spear is a divine weapon, then he didn't understand how he could be easily destroyed. The protagonist replied that this was a warning to him. Besides, he knew who could destroy the spear and that person wouldn't miss Benhai's celebration. Then Lin sat in the wheelchair and promised the king that he would gather what was taken from him. At this moment, a man dressed all in black appeared near Lin's house, and he quickly approached the windows. He noticed Lin's room and aimed, throwing a blade towards the prota. The window next to Lin broke and something passed through her at great speed. Qing realized that a hitman had visited them. Lin managed to lower her head and picked up the blade, remaining unharmed. The subordinate shouted to the main character that she was immediately going after the assassin. Lin carefully examined the dragon god dagger in her hands. Jiang and the mother were sitting in the living room when they heard some strange noises and tried to find out where they came from. Suddenly, the lights in the room went out and the girl looked around in fear. Lin was extremely scared when she realized that there was more than one killer in the house. Jiang screamed when she saw the silhouette of a guy in the darkness right in front of her. The girl tried to find out from the stranger who he was and how he entered the house, but the criminal remained silent. This man was wearing a mask and looked carefully at the girls, saying that they would pay with their lives for covering up for the wrong person. Then a small purple ball began to form in the criminal's hand and he prepared to attack the girls. Lee didn't want to go from the base for no apparent reason and offered to give the man all the money they had. The boy in the mask invited the woman to take her money to the grave. Jiang hugged his mother, who was also trembling with fear. Several agonizing seconds passed until the girls noticed a man holding the criminal's hand. Lin condemned the guy's actions and slightly twisted his arm. The protagonist didn't understand why he attacked defenseless girls. Lin was going to protect the Jian's family even if she didn't like them very much. Then a blue lightning appeared in her hand. The criminal still had a free hand and concentrated his power in his fist. The men attacked each other at the same time and each managed to strike the other's blow. The mercenary laughed and prepared to attack again. The man had fun thinking that Lin was weak. They continued fighting and soon a knife appeared in the boy's hand with the mask. Suddenly the door of the house was about to open, and the bandit asked Lin if that was his family. At that moment the man reacted instantly, and when Xin and his daughter entered the house there was no one else there. Xin entered and saw the girls terrified. Jiang asked if her sister had returned. Xin was surprised that they were sitting in the dark and went to the switch to turn on the light. When the room was lit, she saw the terrible consequences of the battle and asked horrified what had happened. While the mother was recovering, Jiang said that they were attacked by a guy but someone managed to save them. Jiang added that the savior looked like that Mr. Lin who showed up on Axin's birthday. Ray started running into the house and shouting that his father saved the family. Grandmother was disgusted to see this because she considered the protagonist to be trash. Meanwhile, the hero dealt with the criminal and now returned to look at the golden dagger. Qing appeared at the window and regrettably reported that she had failed the task, and the bandit managed to escape. Lin said that this is not important now and asked her to look at the dagger in her hands. Then the subordinate recognized the dagger that the Dragon Lord awarded his servants. In addition, she added that Binhai's celebration was moved to tomorrow night, which confirmed her hunches. Lin asked Qing to go to Wang and say that he must fetch Xin to ensure his safety. The protagonist understood that they were planning to try something against him at Binhai's celebration, after which Qing said goodbye and left. At that moment the bedroom door opened with a roar and the happy daughter ran to the hero. She was sure that it was her father who saved her aunt and grandmother, so her father praised her for her intelligence. Lin took the girl in her arms and asked how she would react if her father wasn't exactly a hero. Ray smiled at his father and admitted that as long as he protects her and her mother, then he will always be a hero. At that moment, Xin entered the room and then asked his daughter not to bother her father. She took Ray in her arms and agreed that they would let her father rest a little longer. Xin really wanted Lin to wake up. Suddenly she heard the cell phone ringing and answered. Lin's wife heard Wang's voice and asked what happened. The man replied that the celebration was brought forward and someone would pick her up tomorrow. But Xin replies that she no longer had an invitation. However, Wang assured that the invitation is just a piece of cardboard and she is a respected guest. The girl replied that she was happy with the news and also apologized for the inconvenience. Then Xin stroked Ray's head and asked her to take care of Daddy tomorrow night. The daughter was happy to stay with her father and admitted that she was not afraid of anything by his side. After a day, the night of Binhai's celebration finally came. The huge territory was lavishly decorated. Li didn't understand why Xin looked so upset at this important event. In fact, Xin was worried about her family, especially after her house was attacked. But the mother rudely replied that her two scum was good for nothing, and now she must concentrate and find a man to marry. Suddenly they turned their heads and Xin saw grandfather with Yan. Jiang held his mother and admitted that she was outraged by her cousin's behavior. Yan also noticed her relatives and asked how they got here without an invitation. Jiang shouted that they were honored guests of Lord Wang and he had personally brought them to the celebration. The guy next to Yuan was surprised by Jiang's beauty, while Yan tried to put herself in a better light. The girl was amused, saying that she had the invitation and started to tell Jiang to go home. Lin's sister-in-law pointed to Yan and reminded her that this invitation belonged to her sister, so she has to return it. But Yan replied that only a worthy representative gets an invitation. The guy next door finally noticed the invitation and almost choked when he saw that it was purple and gold. These colors were the symbol of the imperial family, and this invitation confirmed the rumors that the Jian's family was close to the Wang family. Suddenly another man appeared next to Yan and took the invitation, saying it was fake. The girl tried to take it back but failed. The man noticed that her joy didn't last long. Yan was annoyed because a stranger was calling the genuine invitation fake. The old man ordered the girl to watch his tongue and introduced the respected gentleman named Zhou. Yan immediately felt anxious when she realized that an influential person was now next to her. While a member of his family was trying to figure out why there was scum like the Jian family at such a lavish celebration, after these words the anxiety evaporated and the irritation and anger returned to their place. But the grandfather stopped Yan. The old man bowed and apologized for his rudeness, and also said that the family was on hand. The man smiled when he heard these words from the head of the Jean's family. Then Joe rejected the invitation and blamed the Jean's family members for beating Liu. He shouted that he wanted to feel sorry, but now he was considering taking action regarding the situation with Liu. Yan didn't understand what he was talking about, and explained that they didn't do anything to Liu. The girl quickly looked at Xin, and thought she had something to do with it. At that moment, Yan took Ixin's hand and started accusing her of harming Liu for trying to win her over. Xin replied that it couldn't have been her because he didn't even know about the beating. Liu's father didn't believe the girl and ordered her not to pretend and tell everything. Otherwise, the Jian's family will be forced to immediately leave the city tomorrow. The fight was interrupted by the appearance of Wang. Behind him was the protagonist with his daughter and king. Wang would not tolerate those who started family quarrels in this place. Ray saw her mother and called her. The girl held her father's hand and waved happily to her mother, saying that her father asked for a surprise for mom. Joe looked at the new people with disdain and asked who they were. Liu's father replied that the disabled person in the wheelchair is Ixin's husband named Lin Feng, and the girl is their daughter. Joe started laughing until he cried, saying that he didn't understand the meaning of "this loser is here." The man's laughter was interrupted by Lin. The protagonist asked what he could still do. Sin looked at her husband and couldn't believe that he was really awake. Ray was next to his mother, and now she could show her evidence that she was telling the truth. Joe believed that waking Lin up was useless, since he was in the wheelchair. The protagonist just snorted at this statement and stood up, releasing a sinister aura. Joe was very surprised by what he saw and didn't last long to say that he was going to break Lin's legs for what he did to Liu. Now the protagonist was standing to everyone's surprise. His wife couldn't hold back her emotion and tears flowed from her eyes. Lin reassured her by saying that now everything was going to be fine. Suddenly Yan started hitting him while asking how Lin dared to wake up so suddenly. The hero just pushed her away and left Qing responsible for resolving the situation. The subordinate receives the order and hits a precise slap on Yan's face. Even after being beaten, Sin's cousin thinks she has the right to threaten Lin and Qing. Joe takes the opportunity to also curse the main character as a cripple. The man adds that even though he has now regained his senses, Lin is nothing but crippled trash. Liu's father shares the same opinion. The protagonist is not offended and says that in 5 minutes the Liu family will no longer exist in Banhai City. King says he will do it right now. Joe and the head of the Liu family burst into laughter. They don't believe that Lin has the power to bankrupt Liu's family. Their joy was short-lived, because the old man received a call, where he was informed that the company suddenly broke down and all the investors rushed to withdraw the investment. To top it off, the banks refused to lend money. Now the company owes billions directly, and are about to go bankrupt. Liu's father was silent in shock. Joe couldn't help but worry because his family's money was also invested in this company. The old man has no way out but to humiliate himself for forgiveness at Lin's feet. He just gets a look of disdain. Joe remained firm in his idea that the main character was no one important, so refused to bow his head to him. Joe felt safe to take down Lin at any time. The protagonist displays his scary aura and with a smile on his face, asked if the man was ready. In the same second, Joe regrets what he said and tries to avoid any aggression, saying that Lin cannot touch an emissary sent by the royal family to the Banhai banquet. He even displays the royal family badge while saying that he is there, because Supreme Lin didn't recover in time to attend the banquet. The man returned to the capital to recover. That information didn't seem so true to the people in the place, but Joe assured that he wouldn't pass on false information. Suddenly Lin takes the emblem from his hand and the guy trembles in fear, asking how he dares to steal something from the royal family. Suddenly the hero breaks the badge with a beam of blue light and warns that the news that Supreme Lin has returned to the capital to recover is false. For the people of that place to break the emblem is basically to offend the royal family. Yan tells grandfather that he needs to clarify that they have no relation to this crazy cripple, otherwise the Jian's family could be harmed. Ray enters the conversation when he hears the offenses aimed at his father. She says that Lin is not a coward like the Jian's family and can solve their problems alone. Yan is about to beat the little girl while yelling at her to be quiet. But Lin pulls the woman away from her daughter with the power she has in her hands. He reminds Yan that she can't insult the supreme daughter. Sheen's cousin falls to the ground, after another slap in the face, and she keeps saying that the protagonist is just trash, but soon realizes that he called himself Supreme Lin. Joe was curious to know if Lin is the Supreme of the Southern Territory. At that moment, Qing returns to his master and hands over the army uniform. The main character wears the outfit in a few seconds and admits that he is the Supreme of the Southern Territory, but she can also call him Lin Feng. Sheen is surprised and asks if her husband really was that man who helped her all this time. The protagonist answers affirmatively with a smile on his face. Yan does not believe that he lost such a powerful man to his cousin. The people in the place also did not imagine finding the Supreme. Old Lee joins the commotion while cursing everyone as idiots for not noticing the medal on Lin's uniform. The guests are shocked by the appearance of the royal family's doctor in this place. Lee kneels before the protagonist while saying he will follow him until the end of his life. Lin tells the doctor that he doesn't need so much formality. Joe remains in denial. He says out loud that he still doesn't believe that Lin Feng and Supreme Lin are the same person. For him, the protagonist just paid someone to act. Dr. Lee can't stand such insolence and hits Joe in the stomach with a punch. The guy falls to the ground holding his belly while saying that an old man should not assault a young man. He tries to threaten the doctor, saying that there are important people in his family who will not let this go in vain. Lee holds a power in his hands while saying that he will ensure the defeat of these superiors after Joe is eliminated. In the next moment, the guy is thrown out with a punch in the face. Lee asks the supreme leader to give some order. The protagonist just told Wang to expel the Zhou family, the Liu family, and the Jian's family. After all, they were not invited. The banquet will officially open after the expulsion. Yan and his grandfather realize that they will be expelled, but the girl yells that Xin should be expelled too. After all, she is from the Jian's family. While the old man talks to his granddaughter, Jiang realizes that his brother-in-law is really the Supreme Lin. His mother is also embarrassed for having treated him so badly all this time. Meanwhile, the nobles toast with their glasses celebrating the return of the Supreme. They were finally able to see the hero with their own eyes. On the other hand, the Jian's family was kicked out of the banquet venue. Yan keeps complaining while his grandfather says that it makes sense because Lin was a very famous general before she got in that wheelchair. The girl is sure that the protagonist is pretending to be the Supreme. She vows to seduce Lin because she is sure that Xin is not a woman worthy of marrying this man. Meanwhile, in the capital, the young emperor, also known as the Lord of Dragons, receives the news that Zhou has been defeated by Qing. Lin has expelled him from the banquet and destroyed the emblem of the royal family. The emperor assumes that Qing really wants to separate himself from the royal family to follow Lin. He orders his subordinate to take care of it, but the servant stutters that he cannot approach them. This angers the Dragon Lord, and he sends a beam of purple light, in which the subordinate gets stuck. The emperor says loudly that they must let the Zhou family destroy the Jin's family. They are allowed to use the #1 weapon against Lin if necessary. The servant agrees to follow his orders. The Dragon Lord says he could let this useless thing live if he was permanently incapacitated, but now he wants to destroy it. Later, the banquet ended and Lin returned home with his wife and daughter. Xin's mother comments to the youngest daughter that today the harvest was great. Meanwhile, Ray realizes that the mother does not seem happy and says this to the father. Everyone enters the house. Li decides to show Jiang what she got from one of the nobles when they realized that she was the mother-in-law of the Supreme. Xin's sister was shocked to see the jewelry her mother got. They scream that they are rich. Xin says that she and Lin have something to tell everyone. The women didn't care because they focused on the jewelry. The protagonist's wife asks Ray to go to the room because they need to have an adult conversation. She promises that she will go upstairs later to put her to sleep. Lin promises that she will appear there too. Ray obeys and goes up to his room. Now all attention is focused on Lin and someone asks when he woke up. The protagonist says it was suddenly after seeing his daughter being bullied. Suddenly Xin slaps him in the face. She curses, saying that he could have warned him before. A lot could have been avoided. Lin holds his wife's hand and says that she woke up the day Sun came to visit her. He avoided saying that he woke up because he thought she would choose that man. Xin looks away and lets go of his hands. She complains that she had no other choice to keep her daughter well raised and safe. The protagonist hugs his wife while saying that Xin and Ray are the only people he has. From today on, no one will mess with them anymore. Xin hugs her husband back. Now Lin is calm to continue working. He needs to unlock the royal bloodline and find the 3 great generals. The White Tiger, Red Bird, and Xuanwu are on his agenda. The next day arrives at the protagonist's house. He sits at the table with his family to have breakfast. Jiang reads the news while asking if his brother-in-law really is Supreme Lin. His image is spread on the internet, and some people comment on the return of the powerful general. Lin just replies that the sister-in-law should believe whatever she wants. Jiang tries to win over the protagonist and says that he has taken care of him all this time. He thanks him for the care even though he knows that she is lying. Suddenly, the protagonist's mother-in-law breaks into the house holding an envelope in her hands. Yan is after her. They say that the protagonist is pretending to be the Supreme and is still making the Jian's family run the risk of losing everything. Xin calmly asks what his mother is talking about. The woman throws the envelope and tells her to see it on her own. Xin opens the card while Yan reveals that he did an investigation on him and found out that Lin is not who he says he is. The envelope basically says that the main character comes from Nilizhou's village in Quanhai district in Binhai city. In the letter also says that he is an unemployed person. Xin is surprised, but does not think of accusing her husband of farce. Lin tells Yan to tell him soon what he came here to do. Xin's cousin says that she came to give the information that her grandfather asked for. From today, they will all be expelled from the Jian's family and Xin will no longer be employed by the Jian's company. In addition, they must leave the house today. All this was the grandfather's order. The protagonist looks at his daughter, asking if she wants to live in a house facing her mother. Ray replies yes, even apprehensively. Sin is worried now that she has lost her job, but her husband says that she shouldn't worry. The old woman mentally curses her daughter and Lin from two losers. On the other hand, Lin is only focused on taking care of his wife and daughter, so he calls Ching to come pick them up and take them to the Bixu Lake area. Yan laughs, saying that Lake Bixu is a place for millionaire people. She is sure that he is lying again to be supreme. The main character tells his wife to follow her, and she obeys without thinking twice. Yan asks if he intends to live on the street with Sin and Ray. The protagonist remembers that at first this house was given to him and his wife when they got married, but now he insists on leaving this place. At that moment, Ching arrives to pick them up. Jian recognizes the subordinate and begins to notice Ching's connection with her brother-in-law. It doesn't take long for her to understand that Lin is really the supreme, so she tries to leave with them and pulls her mother by the arm, but Li is convinced that her daughter's husband is a fake and says she won't go with him. Yan is annoyed that she is not taken seriously. Sometime later, the protagonist arrives with his family at the new property. Ray's very excited to get to know the whole place. Lin gives the order for Ching to take care of her daughter's safety. Ching obeys and takes Ray to see the place. The protagonist soon realizes that Sin seems depressed and asks if something happened. The wife replies that she is afraid of all this being a dream. The protagonist holds her face, saying that it is reality. They will be happy as a family again. For now, Lin has not yet regained her strength, but promises protect her. The protagonist adds that no one will ever bully her again. Sin still looks sad despite these words. Lin thinks of a way to make her happy and shouts that she bought the only village in the entire city of Binhai overlooking the sea, then asks her if she liked it. Shin bursts into laughter, saying that people shouldn't know that the Supreme has such a cute side. He says that this side only his family can see. At that moment, the phone rings and Lin's away from his wife. Sin decides to take his daughter inside while her father works. On the call, the protagonist says that he is already going. His wife stops on the way and asks what happened. Lin says that it is a call from the army. He's going to have to go out for a while. Ray yells at his father to play with her, but the protagonist tells his wife that he will probably be away from home for 2 or 3 days. Sin fears being abandoned and is silent. Then she forces a smile and says that she will take care of Ray while he is away, so he can go to work. Lin kisses his wife on the forehead, promising that King will stay here to protect them. Some hours later, the protagonist arrives at the army office and calls for Long Tao. The soldier rushes to hug Lin and says he missed her. The other soldiers don't seem to know the protagonist. Then Long shouts that this is Supreme Lin, the highest commander of the military department of Binhai City. The men bow their heads as a sign of respect. Long tells the protagonist that he took over as Supreme Commander while the hero was away. Now he intends to return the position and retire. The protagonist asks if he wants to retire soon now that he is a Major General. Long replies that the command post has been changed a lot. Now almost all employees are the eyes of the royal family, so he's glad Lin is back. It's time to breathe some fresh air in this command post pandemonium. The protagonist thinks that in the near future there will be new people from the royal family to take over the command post. Long questions if he thinks this will really happen. Lin asks if that's not why he called him. Long replies yes and says that he was so excited about his appearance that he forgot. So the commander takes out some files. The envelopes show the rotation of the national military commanders since the day Lin was incapacitated. It's basically about the situation of the battle on the border. The protagonist reads the papers and says that nothing serious should happen because the military departments are controlled by the royal family. Long replies that this is the problem. These royals are so respectful that they don't know how to lead an army in command. The south is safe, but 10 northwest cities are being bombed. They don't know any more details because the news has been blocked. There is no message from their White Tiger messenger. Lin asks if the White Tiger is in the northwest and has lost 10 cities. Long replies that he is right. It has been 5 months since the last letter the messenger sent. The protagonist read the secret special message left by the White Tiger. In the message, the spy wrote that the Northwest was lost and the royal family was involved. The White Tiger did not know if it would last until the awakening of the supreme leader. Then he asks no one to miss him if he doesn't resist the battle. The protagonist gets angry just thinking that he lost his messenger. Long reminds him that the superior of the military department is the Dragon Lord, so it doesn't make sense for the whole royal family to say that he is in charge. The hero says that he has some doubts about it, so he sends someone to check the details in the capital. In his thoughts, he says that it seems that Shenyang decided to sacrifice the entire country for his own benefit. 2 days pass and the scene changes to the Jian's company. Shin's grandfather says he doesn't know if the decision to fire his granddaughter was right or wrong. Yan is concentrating on her lipstick, but she reassures the old man by saying that Lin is a liar and Shin is useless. The man has doubts about it because since she left, all the partners have withdrawn their capital. The family Jian's has no one else to count on. Yan plays the role of a good girl and says that everything will be fine, But the old man slams his hand on the table saying that nothing will be okay. All his partners quit their jobs to join Lin. Yan puts all the blame on his cousin, saying that none of this would have happened if the finance department wasn't in the hands of Sin. Grandfather takes a deep breath and tells her to hurry up because they are going to find the old man. Yan looks scared. The old man was the nickname of the family patriarch. Before he passed away, he left a letter and said to open it when the Jin's family finds themselves in a desperate situation. Grandfather thinks there is a way to save his family in that letter. Later that day, the protagonist returned home. He turned on the lights and ended up waking up his wife, who fell asleep on the couch. Sin wakes up and asks if he came back. Lin covers the girl with her coat while asking why she didn't go to sleep in the room. Ixin replies that she was waiting for him. The woman feels relieved to see him again and decides that she will sleep now. She advises him to do the same and goes to the room. Lin notices King's presence at the window and asks if she has anything to report. The girl says she has 3 things with Ixin's departure from the company. All the main partners have ended their cooperation with Jeans in the last 2 days. The losses have been so severe that the company is facing bankruptcy. The second news is that the Dragon Master is under house arrest, unharmed for now, but the power has been handed over to one of his former unknown rivals. The latest news is from the White Tiger Messenger. 5 months ago, he was last seen on the northwest frontier, in a place called the Masterless Kingdom. Lin seems to recognize this name. Qing says that the place is in ruins. The protagonist knows this and says that she can already leave. This information is enough for him to understand that the world of internal and external chaos is coming. The next day, the hero woke up his family with a nice breakfast. Jiang didn't expect to wake up so early and was still sleepy. She is surprised when she sees the table that her brother-in-law prepared. The protagonist soon says that the food is for Ray and Sin. His wife leaves the room very sleepy. He prepares her chair and says that maybe she didn't get enough rest because she stayed up waiting for him last night. Shin says that last night he was thinking about getting a new job. Suddenly, Lee starts talking that it's time for Lin to pay for having been taken care of during these 2 years. The mother-in-law demands some amount of money as compensation. After all, his family lost everything after he woke up. Shin defends her husband and tells her mother not to talk nonsense, but the woman doesn't shut up. The girl apologizes to her husband for this and explains that her mother only thinks about money. The protagonist laughs and says that his mother is right. The man has to secure the money for the house. He takes the moment to ask how his father-in-law passed away. Sin replies that his father was in a car accident. The protagonist needs more details. Jiang says he doesn't have much information. His father must have been framed by Yan and the others, probably because he was chosen by his great-grandfather as heir to the Jian's family. The relatives were not so happy, so his family did not receive a single penny of the inheritance when his father passed away. Ray shouts that they must recover his grandfather's inheritance. Jiang angrily asks what a child understands about this matter. Ray shows a necklace given to her by her grandfather. The old man wanted to give the gift to Lin personally when he returned, but he didn't have time. The protagonist holds the necklace in his hand, realizing that it is made of evolutionary stones. Xin is curious because she remembers that she saw this necklace once in her father's office. On the other, Lin knows that this is more than a necklace. The royal family has special lineage abilities, but they know that to evolve it is necessary to use an advancement stone combined with the secret method. At that moment, a beam of blue light escapes from the necklace and wraps around the protagonist's hand. Ray is so enchanted that it ends up taking the stone from her father's hand. It's too late to stop her. The light surrounds the girl, and the parents scream in fright. The blue glow ends up entering her belly and goes out. The girl falls to the ground and soon gets up, saying that she felt that something entered her stomach. Scene asks, what happened? Lin says that the evolution stone was activated by him and selected Ray on his own. Now it is likely that the skill of the daughter's bloodline has emerged, in which case he has no other way out but to call Dr. Li. The doctor quickly answers, worried that something has happened, but the phone simply slips out of the protagonist's hand and begins to float before he can say anything. The cutlery also floats as if it were electromagnetic. All this is because of Ray's power. While things seem to go wrong in the protagonist's house, his sister-in-law relaxes quietly on the beach. The silence is broken by some screams coming from inside the residence. Lin runs carrying her daughter in her arms. Sin also leaves the house and warns his sister that it is dangerous to stay there. Jiang tries to understand what is happening, but her sister leaves her alone to eat sand. Jiang screams angrily when suddenly something covers the sun. She looks up and realizes that it is a giant wave. The girls fall to the ground after being hit by the water. Sin shouts again for her sister to get out of here, and Jiang freezes in place, thinking that he is being attacked by some army of the sea. Without wasting time, the protagonist's wife runs away. A little later, the Dr. Li meets the hero and asks if he is sure he wants to suspend the royal bloodline. Lin replies that Ray's true ability must be electromagnetic power. In the history of the royal family, this power is only legendary. So he sees no reason to put his daughter at risk, so his plan has to go ahead. Lin checks if the 10 miles of coast are cleared. Qing replies yes, and he tells her to get ready then. The group gets on the boat and starts to prepare. Li is doing acupuncture on Lin. He warns that there are 9 levels of prohibition from bottom to top. The protagonist knows what to do after applying the needle. At that moment, the doctor reaches some meridians and takes something out of the boy's back. He screams in pain while convincing himself that he must hold on. For now, the protagonist has unlocked 5 layers. Li continues with his methods because the hero needs to reach 4 more remaining layers. Ray is worried about his father because it seems that he is being hurt a lot. The method does not end there. When night comes and the sky darkens, someone observes the protagonist's boat from the water. The guy is not alone, and taking a blade from his clothes warns the team that it is time to work. At that moment, he is surprised by an unexpected apparition. The protagonist looked at the man angrily. The enemy tries to report to the master before it is too late. Suddenly, lightning strikes him, and the man is electrocuted. Lin's attention is directed to Qing, and he scolds her for not looking straight at the sea. After all, she said she had no enemy lurking. The girl lowered her head and apologized for having failed. The next day, the protagonist returned home to take care of his wife. He saw that she had a fever and left her resting in bed. Then Lin told Long that she had something to say to him. His wife starts to say a few words and he goes to her asking if everything is okay. The first thing Sin asks is where his daughter is. Lin reassures her that Ray is with Dr. Li. Meanwhile, in another room, the doctor tries to get a few words out of the girl asking how she is feeling. Ray thinks for a few seconds and says he doesn't know. She will have to ask her father. The protagonist appears at that moment carrying his wife and asks what happened. Ray runs into the arms of his mother, happy that she woke up. The hero holds his daughter and tells her to let her mother rest for a while. Li warns Supreme that he needs to take the girl with him. The protagonist's wife certainly worries and asks why. Lin simply replies that Ray has awakened the power of the royal bloodline and needs someone to guide her. There is no one better than Li for this job. The doctor enters the conversation and explains to the protagonist's wife that a battle is going on in the northwest. But the royal family hides this fact from everyone deliberately and creates the illusion of national peace. The awakening of the little princess is also an accident. The doctor adds that the one in charge of the capital is a mortal enemy. So Xin needs to know that she and her daughter can become the weak point of the Supreme if they can't protect themselves. Xin worries about the protagonist. Even after the doctor's information, she hesitates to let her little princess go and says that Ray will stay at home. Li has to convince her that he will only be with Ray for a year. He can promise that he will teach the little princess everything he has learned in his life and ensure that she will not be harmed in any way. The main character leaves the choice in Ray's hands and says that he will not force her. The little girl imagines that the enemies that her father will have to face must be very powerful. She fears that Lin will become a cripple again, so she decides to go with the doctor to become as strong as her father and protect him. Li says that this is great and they should hurry. Before going, she hands an agenda to father to protect. Ray says that he doesn't feel like he has spent enough time with Lin since he woke up. That's why she asked him to keep it until they meet again. The protagonist makes a sad expression and apologizes for not being so present. Ray wants to get out of that place as soon as possible, so she pulls the Dr. Li and says she will return in the future. Sin doesn't have time to say goodbye because his daughter ran. Ray increases her steps out thoughtfully. She says she needs to protect her parents. Meanwhile, inside the house, the protagonist promises his wife that his daughter will be fine. Shin tries to find out if he will leave again. Lin says yes. There is news of his subordinates in the northwest, but he promises that he will put everything in order before he goes. The next day in the village of the Jian's family, Yixin asks surprised what they came here to do. The protagonist promises that things soon became clear. At that moment, Axin's grandfather and his cousin approach them. The old man asks the reason for the visit. Lin takes an envelope from King's hand and throws it towards the old man, telling him to read. It's the information gathered by his subordinates this morning. The old man and his granddaughter don't seem happy when they read the envelope. The protagonist turns his attention to Sin and says that the car accident his father was involved in at that time was intentional. The mastermind behind it was Yan. The cousin points her finger, screaming that he's planting false evidence. The old man slaps his granddaughter in the face and admits to having been blind these past few years. Shin is shocked by the statement, while Yan defends himself by saying that he didn't murder the third uncle. She just wanted to warn him that the Ginger family was hers and her father's, but she didn't imagine that he was messing with 2 monsters. She adds that in the end her uncle had bad luck and those 2 monsters tore him apart, so it's not his fault. The protagonist seems to understand what Yan is talking about and assumes that there are other people behind the accident. But his wife is confused by the subliminal message and yells for her cousin to explain properly. Suddenly a voice tells his master that Lin has noticed them. The protagonist laughs, saying that the Jin's family mice seem to have gained weight. Qing runs so fast towards the voice that no human eye is able to follow it. The old man asks Lin not to treat the Jin's family members badly just because he is displeased. The protagonist just replies that he would like to know who the rats out there are. King has just broken into a room and knocks down a blue-haired man. He laughs as he says that his mission has been accomplished and she will not be able to hold him. The man tries to escape, but a fight breaks out and he is neutralized. Then he is thrown into the room where the protagonist is. The guy realizes there's no escape, so a transformation in his body erupts. He takes a different form with 2 horns on his forehead. Lin easily realizes that it is a mutation by the royal bloodline. Yan points to the enemy, saying that it was a person like this who murdered the 3rd uncle. It is clear that it is a monster. The protagonist protects Sin with his hand and leaves Qing to solve the situation. The subordinate materializes a shiny dagger. The monster says it will knock down Qing and then finish off Lin. He jumps at the girl with his claws on fire. But Qing counterattacks with the dagger on her neck. She lands on the ground and sees the mutant choking on the red liquid. Yan looks at the scene in shock without understanding how it is possible for someone to defeat a monstrous creature with a single blow. In just a few seconds, the enemy has been defeated. Qing finds something in the man that catches her attention, so she hands it to the master. Lin holds the device in her hands and hears a voice come out. It is a communication device. The protagonist recognizes Zhou Shan's voice. On the other side, the man asks how he knows him. Lin gets angry because he spared this guy at the banquet. Now his patience has come to an end. The old man of the Jian's family fears that the protagonist will clash with Zhou, because this guy's family is very important. The old man tells Lin not to forget that he was saved by the old master. The protagonist replies that when Master Jiang saved his life, he promised to keep the Jian's family for 30 years, but this was broken when the family itself insulted his wife. The bearded old man tries to say that in the future Yixin will inherit this family, so he better remember that. Yan yells at his grandfather, saying that this family belongs to her and her father. Lin asks his wife to make a decision. Shin quickly says that he doesn't want to go back. The grandfather is in shock hearing this. The protagonist's wife didn't want to live with these people anymore. After all, she had been expelled from the family. The protagonist respects his wife's decision and takes her out of the house while the old man yells for his granddaughter to wait. Lin says that it won't be unfair to Master Jiang, so he will take care of the Zhou family alone. From now on, there is no longer any debt between the Jian's family and him. The protagonist leaves, while the old man and his granddaughter are angry at how the situation ended. Outside, Lin tells his wife that he will be away for 2 days to solve a problem in the capital, so Qing will be responsible for taking care of her. Yixin feels that he gave her husband too much work, but the subordinate reassures her, saying that he only needs to solve a matter in the capital. The wife questions who is this person in the capital that Lin has been talking about lately. Qing replies that he is the most powerful royal member in the capital, named Shenyan. Sin has never heard of that name, yet he has a very uncomfortable feeling. Qing advises the protagonist's wife to get in the car and go home. The scene changes to a few hours later. At the Zhou family estate, the boy's father comments that there is no news about the investigation of Lin and the Jian's family. The man in the green hat replies that the young emperor is impatient. The Zhou family can count on his support today, but surely they will be abandoned if they are useless. The head of the family says he understands. After all, his son was beaten by this guy. The man in the green hat suggests taking advantage of the fact that Lin has not yet regained his strength to knock him down in one fell swoop. Suddenly, a noise catches their attention. The protagonist enters the room pulling Zhou by the hair and looks for the person responsible for the family. The man in the green hat asks who he thinks he is to break into the house like that. Zhou tells his grandfather that this guy is Lin Feng. The old man bursts out laughing like crazy. He thinks the protagonist made a mistake and practically threw himself into the trap. It saves his time from sending people to look for him. The man hits the ground with his cane and a giant cage traps Lin. He is advised to hand over the Jian's family and refuse his own bloodline if he wants to keep his life as a dog. Otherwise, he will not get out of here alive and his head will be offered to the young emperor. Zhou's father asks the old man to wait because his son is still trapped in the cage. Zhou screams for help. The protagonist finally lets his hair down and says he doesn't like being trapped with a dog. The last time this happened, his enemy was murdered. Zhou screams in despair for his father. The grandfather says that the protagonist will be eliminated if he continues to do these things. The truth is that he doesn't care about his grandson, so he presses the button on his cane and sends lightning into the cage. Zhou is electrocuted, but Lin remains unharmed. Zhou's father asks the man to stop, but he says that it's okay if his grandson leaves too, because they will be rewarded by the young master when Lin passes away. The protagonist mockingly asks if Shenyan is already a young emperor. He finds it strange that the Zhou family is so loyal to this guy because he didn't even warn that these tricks don't work. Suddenly, Lin rips off the cage bars with his hand. The old man retreats and shouts that he has never seen such a great force. His men are quickly summoned. Now he feels safe to destroy the enemies with his bare hands. The soldiers are given the command to shoot. The bullets fly to Lin and hit his shield. Then he attacks the snipers with his bare hands. Another weapon is used to stop the hero, but he stops the arrow with his fingers. It is a special armor-piercing ammunition, something that only Shen Yan could provide to his allies. The old man replies that at first this armor-piercing ammunition was created specifically to deal with the royal family, but now it is used on anyone who goes against the will of the young emperor. The bullets are sent in increasing quantity to Lin. The command this time is to explode the gasoline behind him. An explosion took over the place where the protagonist was. The old man anticipates the celebration of the victory and says that it's okay that his mansion exploded because he finished off that boy. The joy was short-lived because Lin jumped out of the flames and hit the old man in the head with a blade. The guy falls to the ground after the fatal attack. The only survivor is Yu's father. With no other alternative, he screams for the #1 weapon to appear. Two monsters enter the room. The boss reminds the two that Master Shen asked to end the Jian's family, otherwise they will be eliminated. The protagonist finds other mutants who have absorbed the royal bloodline. The attack begins and the monsters are at the advantage in quantity, but Lin is faster and hits the blue monster with a powerful punch to the face. The red demon tries a sneak attack and is blocked. Then it is thrown away. That mutation in the opponents improves the physical appearance and physical quality, but it is still not enough to deal with the protagonist. Lin would like to know a little more about what makes these mutants special, but she doesn't want to waste time, so he takes a gun out of his suitcase and shoots the men. Finally, the protagonist blows up the room. Meanwhile, Zhou's father rushes to the office and tries to report to the young emperor. Shen Yan appears on the big screen and asks what happened. The boss informs him that Lin went directly to the Zhou family and the #1 weapon was used to deal with him. The Dragon Lord says he wants to talk to the old man of the family. The boss can't say that his father passed away during the duel with the Supreme, so he lies saying that the old man is still fighting. Shen tells him to stop lying because his face gives away despair. At that moment, a hand goes through the boss's shoulder, and the lightning consumes his body. The protagonist finally finds Shen. The Dragon Lord laughs, saying that it is expected of the Supreme. He dared to go to the Zhou family alone and even finished off their weapons. Lin admits that the special armor-piercing bullets can indeed hurt the royal bloodline, but it seems that the Dragon Lord forgot that the weapon and the weapon containment method are used to deal with the enemy at the same time. Shen curses the Zhou family mentally, saying that they are dumb. Lin points to her own head and mockingly says that Shen needs it using intelligence to keep up with him. The Dragon Lord calmly replies that the royal family is controlled by him. The reason why Lin is still alive is because he has some reputation among people. Shen adds that he can give him the opportunity to obey him, and so Lin can see the true Supreme act. The protagonist replies that Shen murdered many members of the royal family to achieve his own glory. This is ridiculous. The Dragon Lord replies that Lin is too naive. This is necessary to achieve glory. Suddenly, a countdown catches the hero's attention. It is a self-destruct bomb left by the Zhou family. Shen keeps saying that he destroyed his supreme artifact. It is naive to think that he would win the fight. At that moment, an explosion consumes the entire mansion after these words. Meanwhile, at the protagonist's house, Shin wakes up desperate after having a bad feeling. She decides to call her husband to make sure he is okay, but the number is not available. Qing enters the room after hearing a strange movement and asks if something happened. Xin says that she is worried about Lin because she had a nightmare. The subordinate assures that everything is fine with the master, but she can use the emergency contact channel if she insists on talking to the Supreme. Shin understands that she may end up distracting her husband if he is dealing with something important, so she gives up on contacting her and tells Qing to go rest. The subordinate agrees and says that he just needs to call her if he needs something. Xin goes back to bed saying that he is sure Lin will be okay. The next day, Shin was taken to the hospital in Banhai Center after feeling sick the night before. The protagonist went to see her and asked the doctor what happened. The doctor did some tests and said that she was fine. It was probably just tiredness, so she will return to normal after a short period of rest. Lin looks at the girl and asks if there is anything else. The doctor confesses that he found something strange. He did a complete examination and found that there was an abnormal discharge in her brain when she was sleeping. The doctor gives the report for him to read on his own. The abnormality in Xin's brain manifests as a shock or some kind of psychiatric disorder, but the doctor suspects that the nightmare is most likely the result of recent events. He promises that he will take care of it calmly and will give the certainty later. Meanwhile, outside the building, there is a protest. The population shouts to let the Chinese head of state speak. Lin watches the commotion through the window. Suddenly, Qing bursts into the infirmary room in desperation, saying that the situation in the northwest is completely out of the control of the royal family. Now the internet is full of news about the battle. Lin finally understands why the population is gathered screaming in the streets. He questions if there is any action by the military units in the west and north. The subordinate replies that the informant reported that the two military departments discovered spies. Yan was very busy, and thanks to that the contract was torn up and they told China what was going on. Qing adds that people around the world have also launched petitions on the internet asking the general to take the position. Now she wants to know what action Lin will take. The protagonist understands that people want the commander of the military department of Binhai City to be expelled because he is from the royal family. Now the population shouts for Lin to take command. The hero thinks about what decision to make. He orders King to continue ensuring Sin's safety while he is away. The scene changes to the army office. Long gets angry when someone enters the room before knocking on the door. He gets back in a good mood when he realizes that he is the protagonist. Lin complains that the guy is sleeping when Northwest is a mess. He gets his mood back and says he didn't come to give an order, but I would like Long to go with him to the Northwest. The soldier is against any expedition because there is no officer in command. The hero says that this is not an expedition. He just wants Long to accompany him. The soldier seemed to be unaware of the latest news, and Lin said that the situation was leaked on the internet. Long is shocked and says that he only needs a gun to finish off the invaders one by one. He agrees to follow his old master to win the battle and save China. Minutes later, a helicopter arrives to pick up the soldiers at the top of the army building. Wang is there to receive the last order before Lin leaves. The protagonist says that he will leave the city of Binhai in his hands. So he is handing over the symbol of his private army, called the Heijia Army. Lin asks Wang to use this emblem as a last resort to provoke the Black Armored Army. Wang smiles and says that the master doesn't have to worry because the city won't get out of his control. He holds the badge and takes something out of his suit, then hands over a pocket watch with Sin's photo. It was the protagonist's wife who asked him to deliver it. Lin thanks him for this and promises that he will return safely for her. Long tries to bring his friend to reality and says that love weakens the man's fighting spirit, so they must go soon. Long gets into the helicopter when suddenly someone asks them to wait. The protagonist asks, surprised, how he got here. The blue-haired man says that there is not a single place in China that he cannot reach. Lin is happy with Feng's appearance. Long is surprised to see the Dragon Master in front of him. The protagonist says that there are extra chances of victory with this guy on the team. The three of them get on the airship and leave Binhai City. Feng tells them that originally the position of Dragon Master is assumed by ordinary people with no lineage to manage the main military departments. The power of the royal family is contained in this way, but Feng was so focused on the research that he didn't know that Yan had already sent someone to put an end to him. One day he was kidnapped and has been under house arrest in Yan's house since then. He was forced to study the fusion of the royal bloodlines and the descendants of royalty. Because of this, Feng was not allowed to contact the outside world. The protagonist asks if it worked. The Dragon Master goes right to what matters and says that at first the fusion of the royal bloodlines and the descendants of royalty, it worked. Yan used the corpses of countless kings to suppress the revolt of his bloodline. Feng escaped from house arrest thanks to this ritual that made Yan waste time. The protagonist says that it is good that he is now safe. The driver interrupts the conversation by saying that there are 50 miles left to reach the city of Yingjiao. The soldiers get up and open the door, saying that they are going to get off here. Before jumping, the protagonist warns that there are high chances that they will not have reinforcements for this trip, then asks if they are sure they want to go together. Long and Feng shout that they are ready. They all jump out of the helicopter together. Sometime after the group arrived in the city of Yingjiao, located in the northwest, Long realizes that just by arriving in that area, the statistics are already unavailable and the specifics of the area are less clear. He decides to ask for help from a local resident and introduces himself as a member of the China task force, but the man closes the door in his face. Long feels that he was not well received in the city. The protagonist says that they can get the information by themselves and asks the soldier to look at the map to see how far they are from the fort. Long replies that the place is behind the sand dunes. There are still 30 kilometers to go. The group is watched by a little boy who hid behind the rocks. The protagonist tries to buy some information from the boy with chocolate, then asks if the boy knows where the headquarters are. The boy takes the candy quickly and asks if the Chinese soldiers are going to fight the bandits. They should follow him if the answer is yes. On the way, the group learned that some intruders of the royal family have already arrived in the city of Yingjiao. The boy turns a key on his finger, saying that no one in that place will have the courage to help the soldiers. His father has simply changed since his brother passed away. All the brave people in this place were murdered, so no one passes on information. The boy adds that he will only help once. The group can leave if it's not enough, so he uses the key to open the door. At that moment, the protagonist's group comes across other Chinese soldiers. Apparently, the men suffered serious injuries and had several scars. The little boy is proud, saying that these soldiers saved by him and his father last year. The men are visibly afraid that the protagonist's group is an enemy. Lin realizes that the men's accent is from this city, so she holds the gun while saying that she didn't come to ask them to protect the royal family. In reality, he just wants men to protect their own home. Meanwhile, the intruder group called Sand Wolves receives the information that more Chinese soldiers have arrived in the city. Their leader shoots several times while shouting for the villagers to hand over the soldiers. He promises a reward for this, but no villager has the courage to leave his house to meet these men. At that moment, the gentleman who closed the door in Long's face is hiding. The intruder tries to break down the door. The leader with the tattoo on his neck says that if no one explains the whereabouts of these people, they will all be eliminated. At that moment, a long-range weapon is positioned stealthily so that no one sees. The intruder group is the target. They do not realize that they are in the crosshairs, so they think that the best thing is to set fire to the residents of all the residents for them to open their mouths. Suddenly, one of the members is fatally hit in the head and falls to the ground. His companion quickly looks back, looking for the person responsible for the attack. Lin appears and neutralizes the man without making a sound. The intruders did not expect such a strong soldier. The attack was so silent that other members of the squad threatened the population without realizing that the enemy was behind them. Lin uses a rock to get the man's attention and mockingly says that the Sand Wolves' alertness is really astonishing. The attacker turns around and shoots with both guns, but is still overpowered. Lin says that man cannot win with simple weapons. That invader realizes with surprise that the one in front of him is the Supreme. The protagonist knocks the man down and with the gun in hand advises him to be attentive when he meets him in the next life. After that, the guy is eliminated. An intruder sees the scene and hides, but is found when he tries to sneak up on the protagonist. He kneels down and asks to be spared. Lin asks if he spared the residents of the Northwest. After this word, the intruder is eliminated. The resident from before observes the scene. The protagonist tells the Lord to stay inside the house and not leave until all the intruders are eliminated. The man obeys and asks if China is there to save them. Lin says yes. A few minutes later, the reinforcements of the Sand Wolf squad arrive. They continue hunting the enemies. The protagonist has decided to position himself on top of a house to have a better view of the intruders. At the right moment, he jumps over the men and shoots with both pistols. Some soldiers are hit and others flee unharmed. The old man sees through the opening in his house the protagonist fighting alone against several men. Lin also neutralizes the invaders with punches. The resident remembers that the last time he saw someone so strong, it was the man behind the Sand Wolves. The person in charge of the reinforcement squad gets angry when he realizes that his men are afraid of a single lone Chinese soldier. He insults the allies of losers. Suddenly, a fear consumes his body when he realizes that his men are silent. At that moment, the protagonist appears behind him after eliminating the mercenary next to him. The man points the gun, but Lin breaks the barrel of the pistol with his hand. Two soldiers realize that the boss is in trouble, but they prefer to flee and save their own lives. The men of the reinforcement squad run at full speed. The protagonist's team was waiting for them from the top of a mountain. In this moment, the intruders are hit. Meanwhile, the boss calls the protagonist a coward for pointing the gun at an armed man. Lin seriously questions if the guy thought it was honest when his group pointed their guns at the unarmed people of this country. For him, there is nothing heroic in putting the people of China in misery to fight for every inch of land. The boss says that he is not wrong and can shoot, but makes it clear that he has information on how to get to the headquarters and can help him with that. At that moment, the boss takes the cap off his hair and reveals that it is actually a woman. The conversation is interrupted by Long. He warns the Supreme that the mercenaries who escaped from Yinjiao City at Point A were surrounded and exterminated. He stops talking when he notices a woman talking to the hero. Suddenly, the woman says that she feels a headache when she sees the Supreme trash, the puppet dragon master and the little follower named Long. It seems that the boss knew her enemies very well. Long points the gun at her while asking how the woman dares to insult the Dragon Master and the Supreme. The boss tries to gain more life and proposes a business agreement. The condition for telling the location of the headquarters is its release. Lin replies that she does not deal with people of unknown origin. The woman tries to intimidate him at all times, trying to show that she is someone he needs. But the protagonist loses his patience and holds her by the neck with all his strength. He hangs her and the girl agrees to tell her everything. She says she can take him to the Eagle Head Castle. The girl stays on the ground trying to catch her breath. She heard the latest news that the Supreme had woken up, but didn't think he would regain his strength in such a short time. The girl is now worried about her life. Meanwhile, the protagonist divides some tasks. Long must take care of this girl, and Feng will be responsible for organizing the troops in the city of Eagle Point. Their goal from now on is to protect this place as their only fortress. Feng agrees and puts the Chinese chief who had been injured earlier to organize the soldiers. Later that day, the girl is tied by her hands so she can't run away, and she gives information while they are walking to the headquarters. First, she says that the Sand Wolf squad patrols twice a day. They have sent more soldiers if the first team does not return. The protagonist interrupts her and asks how far is it from Eagle Head Castle. The girl replies with vague words that they will arrive after climbing a few more sand dunes. Feng realizes that she is lying after checking the map. In fact, they are going in the opposite direction to the castle. The path she is showing is basically the edge of the desert. Long pulls the gun to the girl, demanding that she not do tricks because her patience has limits. The mercenary pretends to be misunderstood and says that she doesn't want the protagonist to fight alone against 10,000 men, so she's just trying to help him. Lin doesn't have time to scold her because suddenly a yellow car jumps over them and brakes, throwing sand everywhere. The protagonist asks this girl, "Who are these people?" She replies that they belong to the patrol team called Vultures. This squad is the most ruthless of the Eagle Head group. They eliminate anyone of Chinese descent they meet on the way. Suddenly those enemies get out of the car. The bald boss says he will stay with the girl and they can choose what to do with the rest. Lin takes the knife that was with her friend and in a few movements knocks down the Vulture group. The girl is shocked by the scene in front of her because it was literally a single move to defeat the strongest battalion. She knew. Suddenly the protagonist takes her out of her thoughts the moment he hands the dagger to his partner. He speaks in a serious voice that is giving the woman one last chance to tell the truth. She says she can take the group there, but reminds everyone that the castle is easy to defend and difficult to attack. It has a sensor recognition system, 24-hour ground and battlefield surveillance radar. Now the concern is that the sand wolves have discovered his location. Feng says he has already taken care of it. It was easy to hack the repeater and intercept the surveillance video. Long quickly praises his partner's intelligence. The protagonist invites everyone to get in the car because they need to leave now. A few minutes later, the stolen car drives at high speed to the Eagle Head Castle. The mercenary warns that they are close. At that moment, the car enters the sights of one of the snipers of the Vulture battalion. The shooter recognizes the car of his companion Bald, so he decides not to shoot. But when he looks closer, he realizes that the one driving the car is not the bald man. Lin had already noticed the sentries lurking, and at that moment of the order for Long to shoot, the soldier climbed on the roof of the car and knocked down the snipers of the Vulture squad. The enemies begin to fall from the dunes and others are run over. The mercenary says that at this rate they will be easy targets. Lin replies that she never said she would sneak in. Some sentinels approach when they hear a noise, but they despair when the protagonist's car jumps over their heads. The soldiers try to activate the warning alarm for intruders, but Long was faster and shot at the buckets of gasoline he had nearby. Several explosions are triggered after this movement. The mercenary shouts that the Eagle Head Castle also has many Chinese hostages, and Long may accidentally finish them off if he continues to act this way. The protagonist simply ignores the girl's information and asks Feng how long it will take to break the enemy's defense system. The Dragon Master checks the device and is sure that there is little left. Suddenly an aircraft appears above them and starts chasing them. The mercenary screams that it is the armed reconnaissance aircraft of the Sandwolf Squadron. They need to find a way to escape. Lin shouts that the direction will be up to Long. He jumps while his partner takes control of the car. Suddenly the soldiers of the aircraft are surprised when the protagonist jumps so high that he appears in their window. A Vulcan cannon located underneath the aircraft is activated, but Lin simply pulls the object out with her hand. A new explosion happens in the sky. Long laughs, saying that only the boss can do this. The protagonist goes back to the car and tells Long to accompany him. Meanwhile, inside the wall of the Eagle Head Castle, the soldiers already know about the invaders and line up to defend themselves, but the gate falls with the lightning sent by the ultimate. The protagonist's eyes turn red when his power is activated. Now the stolen car can easily enter the castle. In the sequence, many soldiers of the Vulture squad are eliminated. Lin continues to exude his insane power. He is so strong that the ground begins to break. Suddenly a hole appears in the stone wall. The head of the Eagle Head Castle watches the scene with a smile on his face and asks who this guy is. Lin sees a tank approaching with the cannon pointed at him. The soldiers of the castle celebrate the appearance of Chief Ding. In the next moment, a bomb flies from the tank towards the protagonist. He just dodges and kicks the bomb to the soldiers of the castle. More men are eliminated with this action, which makes the boss completely angry, and he tells the protagonist not to underestimate him. The man even tries to run the tank over the hero, but that doesn't work because he sticks his hands to the vehicle and sends electricity. Ding can feel the strong presence of Qi in this guy. Anyway, he feels safe to win this battle when he hits the enemy with a bullet from the tank. Lin unexpectedly puts her hand in the barrel and holds the bomb with her bare hands. Another explosion is triggered. The protagonist remains unharmed and refers to Ding as a sneaky rat. After that, he breaks into the castle and finds the room where the hostages are being held. The woman holds the son while asking if he was sent by China to rescue them. Lin confirms and asks the hostages to follow him. Meanwhile, outside, the castle soldiers clash with the protagonist's team. Long is excited, driving over so many opponents. Then he gets out of the car and starts pulling the mercenary out. At that moment, someone calls her sister Yibing. That hostage who was released by the protagonist runs and hugs the girl, saying that he thought she would no longer be alive. The mercenary gives a smile of joy, realizing that everything is fine with him. The little boy looks angrily at Long and asks why he tied up his sister. The The protagonist's friend replies that it is simple. This beautiful girl is actually a demon who murders, without batting an eyelid. The boy screams that this is not true. The hostages would have been eliminated if it wasn't for Sister Yibing. He himself untees his sister while asking her to tell everyone that she is not a bad person. At that moment, other hostages join them and says that the boy is right. Several hostages were traveling back and forth between the northwest border of China, but they were trapped here because of the battle. Fortunately, Yibing came to save them. The protagonist decides to free her after discovering this. The mercenary says that he can rest because her hands have never been stained with the red liquid of the Chinese people. She confesses that she is a secret agent sent to the Sandwolf squad and was responsible for delivering information to the Chinese army. The time he stayed was enough to discover that the three main forces, Sandwolves, Ancient Snake and Grizzly Bear, are in a competition with each other. The best way in this situation is to retreat. Yibing said this, imagining that the protagonist would not give up advancing. She was right. Lin asks Long to take them back to the city. The soldier worries about him. The protagonist admits that he will advance to retake the lands of China. Long laughs, saying that she will accompany him. Yibing says that she is also going because she wants to retake the territory of China more than anyone here. She tries to convince Lin to let her go and says that without someone familiar to show the way, it is impossible to find the ancient territory of the snakes. The protagonist is against everyone following him because someone has to stay and protect the hostages. Long and Yibing try to win the boss's favor. Lin decides that the best thing to do is to organize all the supplies for them to leave together. After solving some of their problems, the protagonist keeps thinking about his wife and hopes that she is well. The scene changes to Axon's property. Qing suggests that the protagonist's wife get some sleep because she has been awake since yesterday. Sin does not answer. The subordinate tries to convince her that the Supreme would not be happy if he knew how hard his beloved worked for the new company. The girl just says that she wants to help the country as everyone is doing. Her research points out that after one of the partners completely separated from the Jian's family, he founded a new company that could compete with the Mei family. This information was not at all relevant to help the country. The girl is sure that by then the city of Banhai will be plunged into chaos. At that moment, her eyes are directed to a frame with the image of the family. Lin and Ray were the most important people in Axon's life. The subordinate is delighted with the scene and mentally promises the protagonist that she will help his wife stabilize the situation in Banhai City. She promises not to disappoint him this time. Night quickly arrives and the protagonist lies down in makeshift camp. He looks lovingly at his wife's photo on his pocket watch, then gives the image a kiss, promising that he will be back soon. The next day arrives and the hostages organize the last supplies. Fortunately, they have enough food and security to continue alone. The old man thanks the protagonist for all his help and promises that the hostages will be fine, so they can head to the city of the Eagle calmly. Lin is grateful for that. A few hours later, the group arrives, the most chaotic city in the northwest. The invaders made a complete mess of the place. Yibing says that there is no other way but to move on. Long looks to the side, asking the boss if they should go, but soon realizes that the protagonist has already advanced in front. Long thinks about following him, but realizes that Yibing and Feng are standing still. They look incredulously at the map, realizing that they are on the land without an owner. Long asks what this means. Yibing replies that this place has no master. The land without an owner is the most complex place in the interior of the Northwest, because the superpowers are not usable in this area. At that moment, the protagonist simply stops flying and starts to fall. Long says that this is very cool, but is scolded by Yibing, who says that they are screwed. The protagonist keeps falling. Meanwhile, a girl takes a bath in the pool of her building. Everything seems peaceful when suddenly someone breaks the glass ceiling and falls into the pool in front of her. The girl's subordinate runs to see what happened. Lin still doesn't know why her supernatural power suddenly disappeared. Soon a gun is pointed at her head. The subordinate doesn't seem to know who he is, but the girl in the pool recognizes the Supreme. She doesn't understand how he can get to no man's land so fast. The woman becomes interested in Lin and hugs him from behind, asking if he is willing to be her lover. The protagonist quickly replies that he is married, and she yells at him not to reject him so quickly. The woman is willing to conquer him and puts her hand between Lin's legs. At the same moment, he holds her hand very tightly and says he will not think twice about destroying her. The subordinate asks the boss for permission to shoot. The protagonist simply loses his temper and breaks the man's gun with his fist. The girl becomes more and more interested in the protagonist because even though he doesn't have his superpowers, he still manages to maintain a strong fighting ability. Suddenly, the subordinate throws a smoke bomb that blocks the protagonist's view. While they are fleeing, the subordinate remembers that he heard that the Sandwolf squad offered a bounty of 20 million on the Supreme's head. Maybe they can tie him up and sell him for money. The boss gets angry and starts stepping on the servant, asking if he is an idiot. The girl finds it simply impossible to tie up a man who was not seduced by his beautiful body. Suddenly, an idea comes to her head. Everyone knows that Lin is the Supreme of the South. The girl considers using the snake tribe to obtain the protection of the Supreme Southern Territory, while the two devise a plan to convince the protagonist to become her ally. Lin finally leaves that cloud of dust that blocked her view and runs towards her opponents, but he is stopped by the girl's subordinate, who asks him to wait a while his boss puts on the clothes. The girl introduces herself as ᴄᴏᴘᴘыឫ, leader of the snake tribe. She suggests that the two create an alliance and thus defeat the Sand Wolves. The protagonist denies any alliance and says he will end her and the Sand Wolves. Then he questions who the woman thinks she is to think she can negotiate with him. ᴄᴏᴘᴘ replies that she has something that interests her. Lin is surprised because he had not yet realized that she knew his identity. ᴄᴏᴘᴘ assumes that he already knows about the abnormal magnetic field on the ownerless Earth that interrupts superpowers. She adds that now that Lin has lost his special powers, he is no different from an ordinary soldier, but they can work together to remove the restriction of powers in the center of the ownerless land. ᴄᴏᴘ adds that Lin needs to rely on the snake tribe to get there. The protagonist tries to find out some details about the Forbidden Seal, but are interrupted by a scream. The protagonist team stormed the building and took the subordinate hostage. Long points the gun at ᴄᴏᴘ's face and tells the Supreme Court that this woman caught the attention of her enemies after shooting. He assumes that she did it on purpose. Lin asks how many there are people, and if he managed to see which tribe these people belong to. The soldier says that it is more than 100 people, and judging by the clothes, they are soldiers of the Sand Wolves. The protagonist decides to stay and ambush the squad right there. The woman tries again to seduce the Supreme and says that they both have the same goal. Lin is disgusted with her, but Long seems to fall for the snake leader's charms. The protagonist asks if the girl has any plans. She just says that the woman is the greatest weapon to deal with men. In addition, there is one more girl in the room. Yibing hopes he has not understood what this crazy woman meant. At this moment outside the building, the soldiers of the Sand Wolves arrive at their destination. ᴄᴏᴘ tries to make Yibing attractive to defeat his enemies, while the men are hidden in the back door. Lin wanted to fight head-on, but she can't do it because all the supernatural powers have been sealed, and the enemies are in greater numbers. At that moment, the opponents find the two girls in the pool. The men are instantly in love and forget what they came to do, so they jump into the pool after taking off their clothes. ᴄᴏᴘ quickly bends down as she pushes Yibing's head into the water. She does this to give the boys who are at the door the opportunity to shoot. The soldiers are hit, and the girls swim to the bottom of the pool, where there is a passage to the outside of the building. ᴄᴏᴘ liked the emotion she just experienced, but Yibing thinks differently and says that he never wants to do something like this again in his life. The girls finally introduce themselves to each other. The mercenary is shocked to learn that ᴄᴏᴘ is the leader of the snake tribe, but it is expected since the leader has the foolish pride and mysterious self-confidence equal to the report she received from the investigation. At this moment, she is distracted to hear that the Supreme resolved the situation. The men leave the building unharmed, carrying a giant bag of weapons. On the other hand, the protagonist feels that they would not have been able to defeat the enemies without the bloodline skills. Now he is forced to follow that leader of the snakes to find out where the seal that blocks the powers is. The scene changes to the meeting room in Wang's office. Ik-sin thanks him for his help. The man says he has no problem, and shows the list of members of the Binhai City Municipal and Enterprise Alliance. The survey points out that many influential families are ready to act. The new company Sin runs is on the right track. Then she can become the president of the Political and Business Alliance. The protagonist's wife looks carefully at the list, and asks why there are only people from the old guard. She tries to understand where the new forces are. Wang replies that the financial resources of the new forces are not enough to join the Political and Business Alliance. Sin understands that it is difficult to gain a foothold in the alliance. She would not have been able to if she did not have the strong support of the Wang family, but anyway, the old guard has deep roots in complex industries, so Sin is sure that she will not gain their support so easily. Thinking about which, she suggests allying with the new force. Wang is thoughtful. Shin justifies his idea by saying that this information points out that the magnetic field is distorted thanks to the absorption of blood energy. She comes to the conclusion that this is the ritual that Shen Yan is doing in the capital. Wang believes that they need to be aware of this guy when they are sure they can eliminate several birds with one stone. Shin returns to the subject of the old guard. She thinks about continuing with her secret research. Wang signals with his hand for her to speak quietly and says that they can do it. Her research on meteorite iron will not be in vain. Shin and Qing burst into laughter at the man's excitement. The protagonist's wife is happy to be able to deal with the geese problems. She feels that she will make her husband proud when he returns. Later that night, in the Binhai City Banquet Hall, the presenter invites President In to do a congratulatory speech. The protagonist's wife goes on stage and is applauded by the nobles. She holds the microphone and thanks everyone for their presence and support. Sin created a company called United Group and was well accepted by the people in the place, but the politicians and businessmen she joined do not have military power or strength. Qing assessed the situation and had some thoughts the battle that was going on in the northwest was apparently caused by the big families who rebelled. Only the small town on the south coast remained stable, and before being taken over by various forces, Qing believes that political and trade alliances are useless when conflicts arise in various places. But she remains firm in her goal and decides that she will wear the badge of the Supreme when the right time comes. Meanwhile, in the chaotic city in the northwest, the subordinate is under the care of Yibing. He says that it hurts and the girl says that he should act like an adult. The man is embarrassed. Nerba curses his subordinate for letting himself be cut by poisonous herbs. The guy replies timidly that he will be more careful next time. Nerba is uncomfortable with the fact that Yibing says he knows this place and it seems like they are going around in circles. The mercenary replies disdainfully that the woman has nothing to complain about because she can't even find her own territory, so she must not be so rude to the guide. The two end up losing their patience and Nerba yells for his bodyguard to beat the girl. The subordinate hesitates because he didn't want to touch a woman's hands, but the leader of the snake tribe accuses him of betrayal. Yibing tells himself that this woman has no control at all. Now she understands why the snake tribe is not taken seriously by the sandwolves. Long laughs at her, saying that now the mercenary has a new enemy. Meanwhile, Nerba keeps fighting with her subordinate. The protagonist simply gets tired of the noise and says that everyone is working towards the same goal, so any rivalry is useless. Yibing always thought that the protagonist was someone very intelligent, but now she is disappointed to see him trust strangers. The next day, the car parks in some dunes and in front is civilization. Long pulls the gun when a bird flies above his head and makes noise. The subordinate tries to stop him from hurting the bird, but Long puts the ammunition and shoots. Apparently the bird was injured, and the subordinate noticed something strange. The animal continues flying as if nothing had happened. In fact, the shot hit a hand that the bird was carrying. Long thinks about shooting one more time when suddenly someone tells him to get out of the way. The leader of the snake tribe holds the staff and he lights up by casting a spell. Suddenly, the bird falls to the ground. Nerba gets angry and yells that he told the soldier not to shoot. Yibing gives a suspicious smile, saying that the one who shot was the protagonist. Nerba gets angry and asks no one to approach. She is sure that she is in the territory of the snake tribe. Lin asks if there is something wrong. The leader says that this is the double scepter of snake divination. She should have been able to control the bird, but it didn't react to her spell. The protagonist holds the hand that bird was carrying and asks if the woman is really worried about an animal like that. Feng comes closer and realizes that the severed hand is still fresh, which means that the owner of that hand hasn't passed away a long time ago. It doesn't take long for the Dragon Master to do his research and find out that the owner of the hand belongs to the snake tribe. Nerba was so busy holding the snake staff that he didn't pay attention, but it's likely that the enemy arrived in his tribe before them. The scene shifts to the sports center in Binhai City. Qing found that the Zhao family in the east, the Li family in the west, and the Song family in the north each raised their own flags and recruited soldiers. Now the fire beacons in the army called Kaizi are scattered all over the place. Thinking of which, Qing summoned the soldiers of the Black Armor Army Squad. She was afraid that other soldiers had sneaked into Binhai City. Qing decides not to stand by and asks if the Black Armor Army are ready to protect Lin's family. The fully armed men say they are ready to act. Qing also has the support of the Black Armor Army officer. The officer, nicknamed Asura, reports and says that he has organized a special force. His spies are lurking in the 8 streets of Binhai City. Qing complains that he is talking too loudly and says that if he continues like this, the matter will no longer be confidential. Now that everything has been resolved, she asks where the spies are. Asura turns on the radio and walks to the screen. Where is the map of the city of Binhai? He contacts his messenger. The officer points out on the map the Lufang Clinic and notices something strange. Qing is attentive, because the Lufang Clinic is where Ray and Dr. Li are. Without thinking twice, she decides to check all the places where there is strange movement on the map and tells the officer to go with her. The subordinate has a bad feeling because she believes that some enemy already knew that she would put special soldiers to spy on the center of Binhai. If she is right, the enemy must have gone ahead. At that moment, Qing and the officer walk through the streets. She asks where the people he planted are and the man points to the corner. They keep walking and the subordinate tries to understand if the officer used the car or they went on foot. Asura just says that she will know when he arrives. Qing has the feeling that there is a traitor in the Black Armor Army. The officer is not very smart, but she doesn't imagine any other traitor but him. A few years ago, Asura was often beaten for stealing. He wasn't satisfied. Even when he joined the Black Armor Army to make a living, Qing feels like finishing off this guy right now, but is afraid to do it because of the Asura superior. So she decides to wait a while and maybe lure him to her territory. At that moment, Qing meets the special forces that the officer planted. Suddenly, she attacks the 2 men and neutralizes them. One of the possible spies accuses the Asura commander of lying to them. At that moment, the man takes control of his clothes and presses the button saying that it is time to start. Ching is surrounded by several cars. She uses the trampoline spy and jumps into the air, asking what this mediocre trap is. The subordinate's goal is to finish off the traitor first. But his allies drive full speed trying to hit her. King kicks the cars away with her power of strength and then turns her attention to the traitor. She is in shock when her kick is blocked. Ching lands on the ground and the soldier asks if she forgot that the squad's armor is reinforced. Asura mocks, saying that the fact that he is in a parking lot is also not for nothing. At that moment, the allies again accelerate the car towards the girl. The soldier is sure that the victory is his, but the next moment he and his allies are controlled by a supernatural power. Even Ching is controlled by this power and begins to float. Ray makes good use of his lineage. The subordinate is delighted when she realizes that it is the power of the little princess. The traitor's mistake was to have lured Ching to the parking lot near the clinic, where the protagonist's daughter was staying. The Dr. Lee gives the thumbs up and praises the girl. Ray screams that he missed Ching. The subordinate gently touches the face of the protagonist's daughter and says that she was amazing. The doctor laughs, saying that those traitors did not imagine the power of the little girl's strength. Ray says that he tried hard to stay strong and protect his family. At that moment, the protagonist's wife runs to her daughter with a smile on her face. Sin was called by Ching the moment Ray used his supernatural powers on the traitors. The two hug and the mother fills the girl with questions. She wants to know if Ray ate well during his cultivation period and if he obeyed Master Lee's orders. The man confesses that Ray obeyed to a certain extent. Ching changes the subject quickly to congratulate the protagonist's wife for their political and business alliance having been successful. Sin says that he really needed to talk about it. The woman's sad face shows that things are not okay. The protagonist's wife confesses that it is more difficult than she imagined, but she is willing to overcome all barriers for her family. Ray hears this and immediately asks where her father is. Shin promises that they will see each other soon. Meanwhile, Ching moves away from them a bit. She feels a little lost as she didn't expect there to be a traitor in the Black Armor Army. Anyway, Ching is determined to protect the protagonist's family until he returns. Later, Asura is taken tied up to the office. Ching forces the man to tell the whole truth. He says he has no family or friends, so the only thing the girl can do is threaten his life. Ching brings the blade close to his neck and says it's okay if the man doesn't want to talk. She takes the controller that the traitor was hiding in her mouth. The woman breaks the device and takes out a card that contains information about the person responsible who asked Asura to betray the army. The officer finally opens his mouth and says that the only one who can compete with Ching is the White Tiger. The subordinate finds it completely impossible that the traitor is a White Tiger envoy. The man just says that the real White Tiger envoy is in the northwest. The scene changes for the protagonist's team. They approach the civilization that apparently belongs to the Snake tribe. Long knocks on the door of one of the villagers to find out if there is anyone inside. Suddenly, a gun falls from the door with the force that Long hits. At that moment, something catches Yibing's attention and she runs towards the thing. The soldier tries to understand what she saw and the girl asks him not to touch her, then points to the lizard on the ground. Long asks what is that twinkle in that beast's eyes. Lin interrupts the conversation between the two and picks up the gun that fell to the ground. He says that it is better to turn your attention to this house, because there may be some corpse inside. Lin is about to enter when Yibing suggests surrounding and investigating first. The protagonist just tells the woman that poor performance and drama only become the most obvious things, so they should enter now. Long realizes that Yibing is uncomfortable and asks what she is trying to hide. Suddenly, an explosion is seen through the opening where the lizard entered. Now they realize that there is someone on the other side of the wall. Long thinks it best to follow Yibing's tip and get out of this house. The mercenary is the first to run out, but she is stopped by the subordinate of the Snake tribe leader. Lin uses her lightning power and puts her hand in the opening. Then the wall is broken, and they find a corpse full of scale. Nurba evaluates the man carefully. He belongs to her tribe. For some reason, protagonist believes that this man is that lizard that just entered the opening. This idea makes sense to everyone in the place, and Nurba is sure that it was Yibing who turned the members of his tribe into lizards. Long holds the mercenary as he threatens her if she doesn't tell the whole truth. The subordinate says goodbye to his tribe mate and pays his condolences, while the Snake tribe members look quite shaken. Yibing gives a scary and satisfied smile. Suddenly, that corpse starts to swell with some blisters appearing on his skin. In seconds, the guy explodes in front of everyone. The protagonist's team can't hide their surprise. Meanwhile, the leader of the tribe threatens to finish off Yibing. Long still holds the girl and prevents her from running away. Nurba decides not to wait any longer and advances with her staff. The mercenary uses her knee between the soldier's legs and frees herself. Then she takes the gun that was hidden in her back pocket and points it at Nurba. At the same moment, Lin and Feng point the pistol at her. The protagonist advises the girl not to act rashly. She agrees and throws the gun on the ground. The hero then asks people not to attack. Yibing and let her talk about what happened here. The mercenary confesses that she really did all this. She is a white tiger envoy and a double agent. The northwest border has been the scene of constant fights between the Sand Wolves, the Snake Tribe, and other clans. Yibing adds that those who are really harmed because of this conflict are ordinary people like her. The girl admits that she came to think that it was all over. It was on that day that the white tiger appeared and saved her, then saved her village. Since that day she became the man's subordinate. He asked Yibing to disguise himself in the Sand Wolf until Lin appeared. It turns out that the white tiger is the real leader of the Sand Wolves, and his goal is not only to control the northwest, but find the protagonist. Lin is silent. Yibing turns his attention to Nerba and says that the Snake Tribe burned and stole her village, so she just fought back. Nerba understands that she really made wrong choices in the past and regrets it, but Long thinks that Yibing has no reason to be like this and threatens to fire all ammunition at her. The protagonist asks his friend to let the girl speak. The mercenary pushes the soldier away and tells him to obey the chief, so Yibing decides to tell the whereabouts of the other members of the Snake Tribe as a reward for Lin's willingness to listen to her story. She snaps her fingers and the body seem tied to the ceiling. The hero understands that all these people were eliminated by the ally she protected. Feng says that he is curious to know how she turns these people into lizard. Yibing replies that he uses the potion given by the White Tiger Lord. Nerba accuses him of using cruel means, but Yibing assures him that it is very exciting to see those people writhing until they turn into animals in front of him. She adds that the murder of the clan leaders was even more exciting. Lin can't believe she didn't notice this woman's disguise. Even though the Supreme didn't suspect anything, the protagonist understands that she allied herself with the traitor. But the woman starts screaming that it was the White Tiger that brought order to the northwest. Then no one has the right to insult him, especially Lin. Yibing remembers that when her village was destroyed, she walked with many wounds on her body to a civilization where the Sand Wolf Squad was. Some men thought of doing bad things to her. But then the White Tiger appeared to protect her. Yibing always felt that she was ignored. But on that day the White Tiger called her by name, so she can't accept the fact that she is placed as a villain. Since the leader of the snakes was the first to destroy her people and her entire family, what she has done so far is just not to let the names of important people get lost. Yibing also accuses the protagonist of not saving them when chaos took over Northwest. He simply closed his eyes to the people. Feng realizes that Lin is losing his temper when the power of the Supreme escapes from his body. He gets so angry that his lightning simply destroys everywhere around. The soldier keeps the traitor in his sights and asks if he can shoot. Yibing says that it is better for them to shoot her because the curse of transformation is connected to White Tiger Lord. Now he has already discovered its location, and it will be impossible to escape. At this moment, several manipulated birds fly over them. Nerba realizes with concern that these birds have heard the woman's instructions. She fears that the power of her staff has been blocked by the White Tiger. Lin exudes a murderous aura as she orders her allies to be prepared to face any enemy that appears. The attack against the manipulated birds begins. Long uses the weapon and Lin uses her powerful rays. But the amount is so absurd that the soldier decides that the best solution to stop those vultures is to eliminate Yibing. She argues that it won't do any good, and if he continues like this he won't be able to negotiate with the White Tiger. Yibing calls him a fool for not realizing what triggers the trap. She keeps talking and leaves Long completely tired of this story. So he shoots towards her face, but Feng changes the trajectory of the bullet when he points the gun upwards. He thinks that things can be resolved in conversation. On the other hand, Lin believes that the monsters will continue to increase as long as the magic matrix exists, so he flies over the clouds where the birds are flying and activates his lightning power. The monsters are all hit and feathers fly everywhere. The soldier praises the boss's talent, but Yibing says again that it won't work. This trap in the snake territory was specially prepared. The protagonist's team tries with all their might to end those monsters. Yibing adds that Lin doesn't understand the complicated situation in the northwest. Feng ends up being distracted by the girl's words, and the soldier advises him to focus on the mission. At this moment, a red-eyed and completely manipulated bird pierces Long's neck with its beak. Feng screamed in despair, thinking that the worst had happened. But the soldier grabs the monster by the neck and finishes it off. Suddenly, Yibing sends more birds towards the man. Red liquid splashes everywhere and draws everyone's attention. Long ended up being hit in the back, but he didn't give up hitting his opponents. The soldier says that even if he was born again, he would still choose to be a Chinese soldier. Unfortunately, Long falls to the ground after so many attacks. Feng runs to help him, but is stopped by Nerba. She tells him not to sacrifice himself. The protagonist continues the work and cuts the birds in the air. It doesn't take long for a signal to be sent to his communication device. On the other end of the line, someone says that he finally managed to contact him. Lin receives the news that Sin and the little princess have been kidnapped. He ends up being distracted by that information, and the mercenary takes advantage of the moment to cover him with black magic. After doing so, she mentally says that her mission has been accomplished. On the other hand, the protagonist discovers that Wang was murdered and Dr. Li was seriously injured. Qing adds that the laboratory built by the Supreme's wife was blown up. All previous research data on meteorite iron disappeared. She sent people to surround the city and protect the girls, but learned that the white tiger people spread everywhere. Qing apologizes for failing. The protagonist is being consumed by the black magic circle, and he tells her to continue protecting her family. Lin's anger is so great that her energy breaks the black magic. Suddenly, the protagonist screams, asking how the sand wolves dared to lay a finger on her family. A super powerful lightning bolt falls on Yibing, and she turns into a skeleton in the same second. Nerba looks shocked at the power of the Supreme and wonders why he didn't use it before. Feng understood from the Supreme's anger that the white tiger overstepped the limits. At this moment, Lin says that he should have waited for the battle in the northwest to be secretly orchestrated by Baihu from the beginning. Probably he would be used to sweep the wolves from the sand and then arrive in the land without an owner to destroy the snake tribe. This was the plan to distract him, so there would be the opportunity to attack the city of Binhai. The protagonist feels that everything got out of his control when Long fought to the end like a brave warrior and passed away. He asks Nerba for permission to bury his friend with the rights of the snake tribe. Lin holds the body of the fallen soldier and feels that it was his fault. He was the one who invited Long to resolve the conflicts in the northwest. Feng regretted that Long and Nerba's subordinate passed away during the conflicts to defeat Yibing. He never imagined that there was so much going on behind the attack in the northwest. The protagonist replies that there is no point in saying anything now. At that moment, the cloud of smoke that surrounded the place is dissipated. The hero turns his attention to Nerba and warns that the meteorite that controlled the ancient territory of snakes has been destroyed. Now supernatural powers can be used in the landless owner. The protagonist finally comes to the conclusion that meteorite iron is the key to the northwest. Surely the white tiger will rely on the army and territory to get his hands on the meteorite. Lin has not yet fully recovered her abilities to fight head-on against the traitor. But Ixin and Ray have been taken. Then he will do anything to get them back. The three survivors get in the car and the protagonist drives at full speed. Nerba says that she is curious about one thing. She asks if that white tiger is her subordinate. The woman feels that someone among them has rebelled. Lin replies that her influence in the Chinese army was eliminated many years ago. At that time, there were 4 soldiers with a lot of influence in the army: Zilong, Baihu, Shank, and Xuanwu. Currently, the 4 are conserving their forces in different places. Zilong was different from the other 3 and was always by his side. He initially thought that the white tiger was only in the west. But a few months ago, he found out that the man moved to the northwest border. Feng admits that he always thought that Supreme and the white tiger would get along well because they are orphans. He mocks, saying that maybe he is just obsessed with cultivating the will. Nerba doesn't like the joke and says that he will finish off the white tiger whether he is cultivating or not. The protagonist has a feeling that the reason for the white tiger's rebellion could only be related to Shenyan. The scene changes to a beautiful waterfall. Feng wasn't wrong when he said that the white tiger was focused on cultivating. The man cuts the water easily. Suddenly, the messenger interrupts and says that he has some information. Yibing completed the mission but was murdered. Now he wants to know if she will receive the title of martyr. The white tiger leaves the rock in front of him in pieces while asking who Yibing is. The messenger replies with fear that it is the girl that the leader put in the Sand Wolf squad. The white tiger just sends his subordinate to fetch the sergeants. Meanwhile, back in civilization in the northwest, Feng puts the last supplies in the car. This time he will go alone with the leader of the snake tribe. Feng asks if Nerba is sure she doesn't want to go to meteorite space with him. The girl is still thoughtful whether to follow him or go back to her territory now that she has lost her subordinate. The scene shifts to the city of Binhai. The protagonist had no other choice but to go back and save his family. He receives information from his subordinate that Asura set up an ambush in the parking lot. Qing pretended to fall into the trap to capture the mastermind behind the betrayal. That's when the little princess used electromagnetic force to control the direction of Asura, drawing the attention of the white tiger who was acting behind the scenes. Everyone was surrounded by the rebels who worked for the white tiger. Ray tried to use his powers again, but the rebels used meteorites to absorb everyone's energy and kidnap them. Dr. Li was injured when he tried to protect them. Qing kneels down and asks for a punishment, but Lin thinks she is not to blame because it seems that the white tiger planned all this a long time ago, so he asks if the girl has already found out where his daughter and his wife are. She replies that she does not, and Lin says that she needs to find them today. He fears that the white tiger in the northwest and Shenyang in the capital will join forces. Qing says that he did an investigation before the Supreme arrived. For now, Bio and Shenyang not been in contact. Suddenly, a roar disrupts the conversation. Qing looks back and sees wolves approaching. The animals look wild and ready to bite anyone. The protagonist does not make any move. On the other hand, the girl is prepared to protect him. This makes Lin have an idea. Instead of dealing with two enemies, it is better to disperse your forces and use Shenyan's power to contain the white tiger. At this moment, the protagonist wastes no time and tells Qing to go after his wife and daughter. In the blink of an eye, the girl simply disappears into thin air. Now the protagonist says he will put an end to the wild dogs. The scene changes to the royal palace. Shenyan receives the news that Lin has returned to Banhai City. The Dragon Lord wonders what the Supreme may be planning. The servant says that Baihu took advantage of the Supreme's trip to the northwest to suppress the rebellion and capture his wife and daughter, so he assumes that Lin has returned to save these people. Shenyan laughs, asking how Baihu managed to capture someone from Qing, but soon his mood changes when he realizes that maybe this action of Baihu is because he wants to occupy the city of Banhai. The servant gives more information that makes Shenyan drop his glass of wine. His spies said that the Black Armor Army was totally controlled by the White Tiger. Suddenly, the Dragon Lord screams, asking if the subordinate knows what Baihu is ready to do. The servant replies that no one knows the purpose of kidnapping Lin's wife and daughter, but it seems that he took the girls in that place. The Dragon Lord feels that in a while no one will be able to stop these men, especially the White Tiger that took over the protagonist's squad. It seems that not even the Supreme is being taken seriously. The servant says that now Lin only has King by her side. Shenyan wonders if it is possible to defeat them with a wave of his hand. Meanwhile, outside the palace, the hero has the entrance blocked. The guards realize who he is after feeling a dark energy spread. Lin doesn't hear the men and enters the castle. Shenyan was already expecting this and said he could enter the room. The protagonist sits comfortably in the chair while the Dragon Lord comments that it's been a while since they saw each other in person. Lin refers to Shenyan as the young emperor and says that maybe he already knows the reason for his presence here today. He is direct and says that he came to borrow his troops, but it will not be in vain. The protagonist says that after the soldiers help recover his family, he will dedicate himself to pacifying the Northwest and stabilizing the situation in the Imperial Kingdom. Shenyan asks if the Supreme is in a hurry. Lin replies that the forces in various districts are ready to act and may not be able to wait any longer. It would be bad, especially for Shenyan, because his position would be in danger. The Dragon Lord realizes that even without a wife and without a daughter, the protagonist remains rampant. Without wasting time, he agrees to lend his troops, but the front barrage is his electromagnetic force. Lin says she understands what he means. Shenyan is talking about the ultimate sacrifice. He decides that he will inform about the electromagnetic force when the time comes. So he takes the royal family badge and gives it to the protagonist. Lin says goodbye and leaves the palace. For Shenyan, no matter how powerful a person is, because he can become a puppet when he has worries. On ordinary days, the Supreme would never ask for help from his enemy. A few minutes later, the hero gets a car and receives the news that his wife and daughter have been located. They are in the Enslate Lab, a famous green space to study exotic matter. Qing says that he has already checked and the security around the building does not seem to be strict, so it is possible that this is a trap of the Baihu. Lin replies that this little trick can't hold him back. He leaves her in charge to organize the soldiers and send them to the lab. The scene changes to Rei in an analysis tube. Baihu is surprised that her electromagnetic force has not reacted. He assumes that it is because Rei is very young and his electromagnetic energy has not yet been fully developed. At that moment, Baihu finds out that the protagonist has returned to Banhai City and is heading towards him. The guy is surprised that the Supreme Court has come back so fast and soon calls the ally. On the other end of the line, the White Tiger asks to transfer Lin as a hostage. Baihu asks if the trap is already ready and the servant replies yes. Suddenly, a noise on top of the ceiling draws their attention. The two look up, asking what is happening. Suddenly, one of the servants, in the midst of desperate smoke from his head, he warns the Lord that the building has been surrounded by the envoys of the Dragon Lord. They blew up the entrance and are about to attack. Baihu still thinks he has the upper hand because he has the daughter and wife of the Supreme. Meanwhile, outside, the soldiers of the Dragon Lord attack precisely. They report that the enemies in Area A have been eliminated. Now it remains to break down the gate. In a few seconds, the soldiers manage to do this. The protagonist is advised to enter because King informed that the laboratory was after this wall. The hero agrees, and when he enters, he sends the rays to the enemies, who was formerly part of his squad. The protagonist also uses hand-to-hand combat. He accuses his opponents of betraying his brothers and his country, and now they still dare to draw the sword against their former leader. The soldier, neutralized by the protagonist, replies that he is just following his orders. The Supreme stops beating when he hears this. He walks away and then asks if the soldier is still willing to fight him. The man just warns that Shin and the little princess are in the lab opposite. Shenyan's soldiers think it might be a trap, but the protagonist believes it will be another cheap trick. He puts his hand on the scanner and the door opens, allowing his entrance. Lin's soldiers are attentive because the room is full of fog. Suddenly, the door closes behind them. A silhouette appears in the darkness. The protagonist's attention turns to his wife and daughter who are unconscious and trapped in the machine. Baihyu puts his arms aside and says he is happy with the appearance of the Supreme. The protagonist screams, trying to wake up his family. He gets very angry and tries to attack the enemy with lightning. But the man dodges and says that the Supreme is too weak. Lin keeps trying to hit Baihyu. Suddenly, a portal appears next to the protagonist. Baihyu admits that he didn't expect that the Supreme could use electromagnetic force even with the suppression of the meteorite. Maybe it's because he's the key. The protagonist wonders what nonsense the man is talking about, but he soon realizes that Baihyu got the meteorite. The guy laughs, saying that not only the meteorite iron, but in a short time the whole world will belong to the White Tiger Lord. At that moment, the guy takes something out of his suit pocket and throws it on the ground. A purple cloud of smoke blocks the protagonist's vision. He quickly realizes that it is a poisonous mist and asks the soldiers to cover their noses. The protagonist feels disappointed with Baihyu's actions because they were once close to the point of being master and servant. But that doesn't matter anymore because the Supreme managed to get his family back. Later that day, his wife and daughter were taken to the hospital. Fortunately, Dr. Lee was already recovered. He took care of Vixen and Ray, so the protagonist had nothing to worry about because they would wake up soon. At that moment, Qing brings some information to the Supreme. She warns that the Black Armor Army was completely controlled, but Baihyu escaped. Lin asks if she knows where the meteorite in his hand came from. The servant found out that it was brought from the territory of snakes. The Inslate laboratory especially studied how to control the electromagnetic force. Suddenly, the protagonist punches and leaves the wall crumpled. Today, it was necessary for him to realize that Baihyu is just a puppet of the White Tiger. And for Lin, it is more than clear that the ambition of the White Tiger is growing. He even had the courage to include Xin and Ray in this mess. It is possible that Baihyu will remain steadfast, now that the military power of the Black Armor Army is in his hands. But it won't be long. The conversation continues and they think of a plan to find the location of the White Tiger. Suddenly, the protagonist's wife wakes up and he gets scared. Igson hugs the Supreme and says that he is finally back. Lin hugs her back and apologizes for the delay. The two talk for a moment and he tries to know how his wife is feeling. The woman doesn't feel anything different in the body and also realizes that the protagonist is unharmed. At that moment, another person enters the room. The two look happily at their daughter. Shin is relieved. The Supreme turns his attention to his wife and begins to say that he missed her very much. He does not hide his concern for protecting his family, and that's why he needs to leave now. The hero strokes his wife's hand, saying that when he gets rid of Shen Yan and Baihyu, they can be together forever and live happily. His wife wishes him good luck and says that she believes in him. Ray says that his father will be the winner. The aircraft lands on the roof of the hospital to take Lin. His goal is simple: break the iron meteorite and bring peace to China. Qing tries to find out if Xin and the princess were taken safely to that place. Lin replies that yes. Ray's electromagnetic force aroused the interest of countless people. That's why he tells Qing to stay and command the protection of his family. He says that when all goes well, she should find him in the northwest. The scene changes to the northwest. The members of the Sand Wolf squad celebrate the capture of a beautiful woman. Nurba is surrounded by those disgusting men. Before she notices, a bullet goes through her shoulder. Nurba falls unconscious to the ground and the men think about what to do. One of the mercenaries who holds Nurba's staff says that it is better to tie her up and take her to the leader. They are about to get into the car when a sword falls from the sky and leaves the car destroyed. The mercenaries look towards the path the sword has traveled and see no one. Suddenly, a man with a reinforced armor on his body takes the sword back. The members of the Sand Wolf squad start shooting. That hooded man wields the sword so hard that flames begin to come out of it. The next moment, some mercenaries are cut. Others flee and try to hide behind stones, but are found. The man in armor realizes that some members took the car that had not been hit. He decides not to follow those soldiers and asks a man who stayed behind what happened to the territory of the Snake tribe. The mercenary responds with a tremor in his voice that the White Tiger destroyed the territory and they stole some supplies. The armored man questions what the intention was to arrest Nurba. The mercenary hesitates and is almost hit by the sword. He soon says that he had no intention because they just met her. In addition, they abandoned her staff. The guy takes a deep breath of anger and decides to leave. Meanwhile, at the China Central Training Base, Qing brought Inks into this place because the central base is the safest and most secure place in the entire country of China, and it is also where the Supreme trained his troops. Sin asks if this was an order from Lin. The subordinate replies yes, but says that the protagonist's wife doesn't need to worry because they are safe with Shai Ying, a former right-hand man of Lin and who has a lot of knowledge about electromagnetic force. Igzin is a little relieved hearing this and says that she trusts him, but she also wanted to do something for her husband. It is at that moment that the subordinate remembers something and asks if Ixin remembers the necklace that his father gave to Ray. The woman replies that she never managed to decipher that relic. King suggests asking Shi Ying because he is very knowledgeable about these things and should be able to help. Scene says that it is a great idea. The scene changes to the next day in the territory of the snake tribe in the northwest. That man in armor captures a snake and puts it in the pot. While he cooks his lunch today, some voices are heard nearby. The protagonist walks with a resident of the place. The old man tells Supreme that he hasn't seen his friend since he left the northwest. It seems that the Sandwolf squad has not committed any offense since he left. The old man adds that yesterday a tall and strong man came from the sky. He had a fierce look, but he did nothing and slept in the square with his huge sword. The villager points to the man he was talking to. Our protagonist comes closer to Xuanwu and says that it's been a while since the last time they saw each other. Xuan removes his helmet, saying that at that time he broke off any contact with Baiho. Recently, the traitorous leader instigated the Black Armor army to rebel, and now they are hunting him. Xuan adds that he has been looking for the protagonist since he heard that he had woken up. Lin asks where Suzaku is, and a silence takes over the place. The old villager brings some water to them and asks what Master Xuanwu is doing with the staff of the leader of the snake tribe. The man in armor replies that he recovered the staff when he arrived in the territory of the snakes and found the soldiers trying to capture Nerba. Lin warns her friend that Nerba, the staff, and the meteorite are closely related. Probably the white tiger needs the three to continue his plan. Xuanwu thinks it unlikely to cross the meteorite without Nerba. The protagonist says he is right and shouts to save Nerba. The scene changes to the territory of the Sandwolf. Nerba was hung from a wooden cross and is being watched by the mercenaries. The protagonist thinks that this may be a trap to capture them, but that will not stop him from acting. Xuanwu receives the order and falls from the sky among the mercenaries. The men are launched, flying with the force of this landing. The trap is activated and bombs are dropped on Xuanwu. Lin yells for her partner to back off. At this moment, a silhouette appears on top of the Sandwolf castle. A man mocks the protagonist, asking if he thought he was going to come in here and break security. He points to the side and tells the Supreme to look. Those hostages that the protagonist saved when he arrived in Northwest were being threatened again. The retired soldier takes the pistol and shoots one of the hostages. He advises the Supreme not to approach rashly. But the protagonist does not follow the man's suggestion because one of the hostages has already been hurt. The old man gets angry when, and soon throws a mist of sand. Lin knows that they are using the sandstorm to make up for the current power outage, so he yells that he will handle the situation while his partner saves the hostages. Xuanwu obeys and holds his sword tightly as he moves forward. The castle keeps sending bombs to stop the man in armor, but Xuanwu jumps out of the flames. The forces of the castle become more intense and everything begins to shake. The protagonist worries about the hostages and asks his friend not to overdo it. Xuanwu holds the stone where the hostages are and gives Lin time to save them. Fortunately, the plan works. But that old soldier still had a trick up his sleeve. At that moment, the ground where the Supreme is starts to sink. The real trap in that place was the underground of the Sandwolf base because he was turned into a huge crusher. The old soldier takes the opportunity to flee in the airship. Lin's body is enveloped by the sand and he is slowly pulled down. He tries to leave when suddenly something in the sky catches his eye. The Supreme is saved by the huge birds that pull him out of the crusher. They are controlled by Nerba.